Good evening, everyone. I am Sharon Van Sickle Robbins, one of the co-chairs. I'd like to welcome everyone to the fourth meeting of the Independent District Commission. Commissioners and members of the public, welcome. Today is Monday, April 10th, and we will be here from 6 to 9 p.m. via Zoom and some folks that are there at the Portland building. I'd like to thank everyone for working with us as we move this meeting to this evening rather than as originally scheduled last Wednesday. It's totally appreciated that you all managed your schedules to let that happen. Before we get started, I'm going to pass it to city staff to go over our Zoom meeting logistics. Adam?
My name is Adam Briggs. I work with the city of Portland. Just wanted to cover some quick Zoom logistics for everybody. This meeting is being recorded for folks that can't make it today and for later viewing. The recording will be posted on our website. We have the question and answer and the chat feature available today. For question and answer, folks listening in, if you have a question or thoughts, you can submit those through the Q&A feature. The Q&A feature can be found at the bottom left of your screen. Commissioners, please don't forget to change your chat setting to everyone so folks listening in can see that as well. And we have closed captioning available as well. It's enabled. You can access it and turn it on by hitting the closed caption button at the bottom right of your screen. We also have American Sign Language, ASL, and Spanish interpretation. And folks can access that through the bottom of the screen as well.
Thanks, Adam. I'm going to take a second to go over our meeting agenda for this evening. We're going to begin our meeting with some commission business, and then we'll hear an update from the Community Engagement Work Group, followed by an overview and analysis of the public comment that we received on district plan criteria, both at our public hearing and via submitted comments. And after the public comment overview, we'll have an hour to discuss whether we'd like to add any district plan criteria to those prescribed in the charter. Adding criteria will require a vote by the commission. We'll then take a 10-minute break. And when we come back from break, we will spend the rest of the evening with Flow Analytics going over our mapping tools and discussing what we'd like the first draft maps to consider. Any questions about our agenda?
One quick question. If the additional criteria discussion takes less than an hour, are we prepared to move through the agenda, or will we have to take a break all the way to 7:50 to get Flow Analytics going?
So we do have Flow already on the call. So assuming we'll still plan on taking a 10-minute break at the end of whenever the deliberation finishes. So if we need to, and we finish early for the entire evening, we can do that as well.
Thank you.
So with that, I'm going to go to our commission business. We just wanted to share with folks that Commissioner Saxena and my roles as co-chair are going to be coming to an end on April 30th, and we will need a new set of co-chairs to serve May 1st through June 30th. If you're interested in serving as a potential co-chair for this next term or a future one, please let either staff, Commissioner Saxena or I know. The last meeting we're going to provide over will be next week's April 19th public comment session. So with that, I'm going to pass it off to our facilitator, Autumn.
Thank you, co-chair. So we're going to move to two votes to approve the meeting summaries for March 13th and March 22nd. I'll take them individually just so we're clear on what everyone's approving. Just for the benefit of the commission and the public, the meeting summaries are available on the event pages for prior meetings. And the March 13th meeting was a work session with public comment, and the March 22nd meeting was a public hearing. So Are there any proposed edits or changes to the meeting summary, the meeting minutes for March 13th? Commissioner Fleischman.
Thanks. So there's a general question, and then I have the specific suggested change. The general question is, if we in reading the summaries find kind of small typographical issues or editing issues, can we just send an email to staff suggesting those changes so that they can be made prior to the final? That's the general question. Then I'll point out the issue that I found.
Okay, I'll just check with Sophia. I don't see any procedural issue with that, Sophia.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. No problem with that.
Okay, that'll might save us a little time in going through this. So what I wanted to point out is on it starts on page 2 and goes to page 3 of the 313 summary for Laura Rogers. She said, and again, I say this because people will be reviewing these meeting notes, and I want to promote clarity. It says she is impressive, and I believe it should have read she is impressed. And that's the kind of thing where somebody else coming along later might be confused. So thank you for answering the general question and taking that specific comment.
And that is a substantive change, and we'll make it, because just for clarity, there doesn't need to be a motion on that one to approve, and it does need to be corrected. So we'll have that one updated. Are there any proposed edits to the minutes from March 13th?
I move approval.
Thank you,
As
Commissioner.
with the change as noted.
Perfect. And do I have a second? And Commissioner Fleischman, I recognize you as a second. And is there any opposition to adopting the minutes from March 13th? Okay, seeing none, those are approved. Let's move to the March 22nd minutes for the public hearing regarding district criteria. Are there any proposed edits to the March 22nd minutes? Commissioner Chisholm.
I don't have actually an edit. I just want to acknowledge that I was absent for that meeting. I was out of town and hoping to be on, but the internet did not cooperate. I will just let you know, and anyone listening know, that I went back and watched the entire hearing and enjoyed very much the public comments. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. They were really interesting and thoughtful. Commissioner Fleischman.
Yeah, thanks. Sorry to, this is the former middle and high school teacher in me coming out. Thank you. In looking over the comments, there's comment by Jenny Lee. It's from the Coalition for Communities of Color on page 2 of 6, where in the final sentence, it reads currently should not be own criteria. And I assume that it means should not be only criteria. And again, for clarity, for somebody who wasn't there and didn't hear it, it might be helpful to make that correction. If it seems like that was the actual kind of intent of the message.
I'm rereading it as well. And if this motion works, I think we should probably review the video just to be sure we recognize exactly what the intent was, because I'm reading it a couple potential ways now, and I want to make sure it's accurate. So if there would be a motion, perhaps just allowing the staff to just go back and address that and update it. Okay. Do I have a motion to approve pending the review of, oh, sorry, actually, before we do that, are there any other edits to the March 22nd minutes? Okay. So seeing none, is there a proposal on the table? Is there a motion on the table to approve pending the review of the point to Jenny Lee's comments?
This is Paul Lumley. I move to approve the minutes for March 22nd with provision that staff will review the video for accuracy of Jenny Lee's comments.
Perfect. And a
Second.
second, please.
Second.
And Commissioner Chisholm. Thank you. Any opposition to the motion? Okay, seeing none, those are approved with the provisional edits, review and edit. Okay, so some additional commission business is that going forward, following this meeting, you'll have a new facilitator from Ontiveros and Associates. Her name is Amber Ontiveros, and she's on the call today and will be co-facilitating this meeting. So I'll just provide a little introduction and then turn it over to Amber for a brief remarks. So Amber Ontiveros' experience spans 2 decades of advocating for civil rights among impoverished and communities of color. She's a former Bush and Obama advisor at the U.S. Department of Transportation. Her firm, Ontiveros and Associates, specializes in change management, policy development, and coalition building, including DBE contracting, Title VI, and environmental justice laws for which she authored. She's passionate about lifting up voices of community leaders in participatory policy making, and we are very honored and fortunate to be able to have her on board as a facilitator. And I know you're in great hands. So I'd just like to turn it over to Amber for a few remarks.
I just want to thank everyone for the opportunity to be here today. And I also want to really state to Autumn that she's just done a phenomenal job. I've had about 4 days to come up to speed on the work, and the entire commission should really applaud yourself for the technical nature of this work and the depth and breadth of your understanding. It's really, really remarkable and really an honor to be here.
Thank you, Amber. If you'll allow me, I'll also just like to take a moment to just thank all of the commissioners for your service to date, just the intentionality, the thoughtfulness, and the seriousness with which you take the process itself demonstrates great accountability. And I mean, I'm looking forward to observing your work on the side. Thank you very much to everyone. So with that, I will pass. We have Adam, do you mind progressing this slide? I'm going to have Commissioner Hansen provide an update on the most recent community engagement work group and their progress to date. Commissioner Hansen.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Autumn. All right. Good evening, y'all. Really thrilled to give an update from the Community Engagement Work Group. We had a meeting on March 28th, and I was nominated to give the report out. So here we go. Before I dive in, I just want to kind of come back to the purpose, really, of the Community Engagement Work Group, which is really about ensuring that we are engaging the community in the way that I think we all want to, and takes a lot of time, effort, and intention and future planning, like as far in advance as possible, to do in a way that really aligns with all of the values that we have talked about around equity and inclusion and anti-racism and transparency and like all of these things. So our discussion was really around our community engagement work plan as a commission, the July public hearings, and the creation of a stakeholder list. So thank you, Adam, for moving on to this slide. And the one other thing I'll say before I dive into the specifics of this slide is one of the things that we also continued to come back to was this idea of like access. Like, how do we make this this whole experience as accessible and simple as possible for as many people to engage with, specifically with a focus on folks who perhaps have not felt that they have a place to engage with conversations like this in the past. So excited to talk through a couple of slides. So what you've got on the screen here, one of the things that we talked about, as you'll see in the first bullet point, is the importance of having a really proactive communication plan. Again, the intention behind this is to educate and involve the community from the beginning. to help the community understand the work that we're doing, kind of number one, to help track our progress, number two, and that also that we are communicating our path. So one of the ideas that came up in our work group conversation is this idea of thinking about communications in like a phase 1 and phase 2. So phase 1 is thinking about kind of now through May, that would, after tonight's meeting, we will have our established criteria. And the thought is to have this phase 1 be really focused on communications and outreach once the criteria is established. And as we are like just kind of starting the process of maybe thinking about what maps might look like. And so our thought with phase 1 is we can put out a series of questions, which I'll get to in a minute, to gather people's like lived experiences of the things that of the criteria that we are trying to use to actually guide the maps that we're putting together. So essentially helping us define our terms. What is people's lived experience of a community of common interest, for example? So the idea is that kind of information gathering and defining of terms is phase 1. And then our thought with phase 2 is that would be more kind of like June through July, that would be communications and outreach specifically on getting feedback and reactions to the drafted plans that we actually proposed, right? So like maybe here's a couple of maps, like react to them, right? Like, what do you think? So we thought about those two distinct phases being useful. We also thought, one of the learnings that we talked about from the public hearing that we had was how like really kind of juicy of a conversation it was in the public hearing when we posed a question, right? We posed this question about adding an additional criteria, and there were some very thoughtful replies. So because of that, we had the idea of doing a similar thing in this kind of phase 1 communications approach. So having some really specific questions that are simple and straightforward, that get to the heart of what we're trying to figure out from people, that will help us determine, again, people's lived experiences of defining their communities. So on the screen, on the bottom half, you'll see examples of what those questions might be. So for example, like how would you define your community in Portland? What physical places are most important to the community, or something like where does this community gather, right? Thinking about like physicality of space. A third possible question being something like what geographic or physical boundaries are important to the community, or something like what are the physical boundaries of this community, to sort of, again, understand the like lived experience of place that is coming into this. And then the fourth question, something like, what should the commission know about your community or other communities in Portland when considering where to draw the district boundaries? So again, just saying like what should we be thinking about? Like what should we know? So these are our sample questions for phase 1 that are really focused on defining community. Let's go to the next slide, please. And I am seeing yeah, exactly. Commissioner Siegel, I just saw your note in the chat. I completely agree. The idea of like inviting really specific questions to help focus the input, right? And I think that once again, because like, and we were really thinking like what would be most useful to us, right? And how do we ask specific questions to get that from as wide range as possible? So we talked about in terms of our very accelerated timeline here for our draft engagement plan. So a couple of pieces that you'll see on the screen here. I'll talk through some specifics and then talk through this timeline. So first of all, we had this like great brainstorming session about what community engagement could look like, what tools do we need, things like that. So we talked about first and foremost, ensuring like future toolkits and key materials, like these prompting questions, for example, are translated into more languages. I believe for the criteria hearing, we had English and Spanish. We had the idea of looking at for example, the 12 languages that Multnomah County uses in ballots for elections, which are representative of the most populous like languages spoken in Portland, seeing if we can translate this material into all of those languages. We talked a lot about ensuring that there are multiple ways to share input in addition to, typing up testimony and also showing up at a hearing, including, for example, leaving voicemails. We also had a comment about wanting to be more explicit about the fact that the commission is accepting input and feedback in any language. So feedback does not have to be received in English, and that we can have kind of on the internal side, we can gather feedback in any language. We also brainstormed some ways around things like incentivizing engagement, right? Like incentive, like a raffle drawing of your first time commenter or something like that as like it gets in. So again, like really thinking about kind of creative ways to generate a kind of excitement around this. Another big piece that we talked about is communications. So we talked about wanting to build, thinking about like content and timing and execution of communications. So we talked about both like paid media and then also earned media. So on the paid media side, something like, if we have a budget, I believe there might be funds in the budget, or we can talk about getting like radio ads or newspaper ads or kind of wherever social media, I don't know. We didn't talk about specifics of that, but whatever paid media, like how can we use the dollars that we have as efficiently and targeted as possible to spread the word that this is happening. And I think especially we talked about around the public hearings in July, which will be the hybrid ones, can we get pro bono marketing donated, things like that. Again, getting that word out. And then we also talked about having an earned media strategy, which is more like op-eds or press coverage. So the idea of like co-writing an op-ed from either the co-chairs or from the commission that we try to get placed somewhere, or like having like media interviews, like thinking about where various communities get their news and hear about things that are important to them throughout Portland, and try to get placements in those areas to, again, really kind of meet people where they are and make everyone feel like there is a personal invitation to be involved in the process. And then one of the other big pieces that we really talked about, which is also where all of you come in, is wanting to tap into the expertise of our commissioners, right? Like everyone on this commission has a vast amount of expertise. And I do believe that some folks have a marketing background on this commission. So like whatever expertise or strengths that you have, that you can kind of contribute to this kind of communication, outreach, and engagement part. We talked a lot about wanting the commission as a whole to feel a deep sense of shared ownership. Like in my mind, this community engagement piece is arguably like one of the most critical, if not the most critical piece of ensuring a final outcome that has like buy-in and genuine enthusiasm across the city. So thinking about the idea of shared ownership. And then on the last slide, please, Adam. We also talked for the July public hearings. We had a conversation about these as well. As you all know, we're required to have 2 hearings in each of the proposed districts. They will be hybrid, so they'll both be in person and virtual. Some of the things that we talked about with regards to these hearings are having educational materials available. For example, starting each hearing with an educational presentation, like the one the co-chairs gave a couple of meetings ago that was really helpful to sort of, again, like frame the conversation, what we're doing, what we're looking for, right? Like what kind of feedback is helpful, what kind of questions we're asking, what is and is not within our purview. We talked about a fact sheet, a community outreach toolkit, again, wanting that translated. In terms of location, we really want to be thoughtful about where we host the hearing due to associations with various types of spaces. And again, thinking about who has access and who doesn't. We talked about public schools, we talked about libraries, again, very much kind of in brainstorm session. And we also talked about working with community organizations and partners and other stakeholders to help amplify these hearings. And again, thinking if people hear from someone they trust to come to this hearing and like receive an invitation kind of as validators for this, that could be beneficial as well. Though again, like thinking holistically about things like representation and access. And then last but not least, we also talked about having a community stakeholder list, the idea of like all of us are out, in our lives, in our jobs, in our communities, in our world, and likely, getting feedback from folks, opinions here and there about things. And so we talked about, as we engage and talk with the community about the work that we're doing, we as commissioners want to have a way to track the feedback we individually receive that we can report back to the commission. If someone doesn't want to like submit a full public comment themselves, but relays something to us that we want to relay back to the group. So the staff, Sophia said that she would create a simple online form for us as commissioners to kind of track who we talked to, the general feedback, if any staff follow-up is required, and things like that. So please do be on the lookout for that. Commissioner Manjarrez, I just saw your comment in the chat, and I love that idea of having a briefing session or press packet for diverse local media sources. I think that's great. And being really intentional, yeah, exactly, about like where we're getting things placed, like who we are reaching out to as trusted sources for various folks. I will first ask the other working group folks if there's anything that I missed, and then would love to open it to the group. Autumn, I'll let you open to the group if there's any like feedback, thoughts, questions, like would love to have this be an ongoing conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you for the overview and just getting into the details, but also more so also the rationale for why the working group came up with specific approaches and tactics. And so are there any specific, just to open it up, are there any thoughts, comments, feedback in addition to what's been in the chat so far? Let's start with Commissioner Wise.
Yeah, thank you so much for all this work. I think this looks awesome, and I'm excited to get into it. One question that I did have is, for the written testimony, would we be able to see if folks submitted maps themselves? Would that be a way for us, I guess, to view, I guess, visually kind of what folks are thinking?
Just to clarify, Commissioner Wise, are you talking about seeing if specific people who are providing testimony have also provided maps, or just more generally, just knowing when maps have been submitted?
Yes, I guess to that first one, like it, just trying to make sure that we're able to see, even if they submit it in that form, kind of like what they're thinking visually.
Okay, perfect. I think so. The staff will have that feedback and see if we can accommodate it. I'll just as long as the names are the same, as long as people are submitting under the same names or submitting not anonymously, there's probably a way to accommodate that request. And I'll read this one out loud from Commissioner Siegel. Another idea, it might be possible to provide a drop-in session to contribute input to the mapping alternatives and or to learn how the tool can be used to provide their input. So I think if I understand it correctly, Commissioner Siegel, are you thinking more of an interactive, almost like draw with us session?
Almost like, thanks for the question. Almost like a kind of a drop-in learning session. There is this tool. It is a powerful tool. And by looking at things in different ways, you get different results. And perhaps there's just, I don't want to use the hackneyed old term of open house, but maybe there is some kind of a drop-in session where if folks do have the time and the interest, that's one way that they could perhaps get experience seeing what it is that the tool can do and how to provide their own input as we go through the hearing process.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Fleischman.
Yeah, I just have a little bit of a process question and then just a couple of ideas to use as a kind of a springboard from kind of the neat ideas that are coming out. So the process question is, for those who are in this work group, would you prefer to kind of hear us provide these comments orally like this, or are you okay with kind of us feeding into the chat function? This may be also a question to the staff. Kind of what's the preferred modality in terms of carrying on this conversation?
A couple of things. Well, we'll probably have to end the discussion portion in a few minutes just to stay on time. So if you have additional thoughts throughout the meeting, the chat function would probably be the best. In terms of if it's probably a point for discussion or if we kind of need some clarification, I'd probably say orally is probably most effective, especially if it's something you'd like to discuss with the broader group to see if,
Yeah.
to gauge interest.
Got it. So I'll end quickly. Thanks for the feedback. Just thank you, work group, for doing this. Kind of one of the things I think to think about is also to have these activities when we go out in the community maybe be a little bit more fun and a little bit less formal if possible. So like things like a video feedback booth where people can just give like 15 seconds of their thoughts or something like that, an answer to a specific question or something like that. That might be fun, or have somebody who's a scribe who will take your comments and actually write them down for you, as opposed to you having to provide written testimony if you're not comfortable doing it, or if that's your preferred way. And the third, just kind of building on Commissioner Siegel, is maybe have somebody at the meetings that helps play around with maps, actually there, like be able to sit down and play around. So things that become a little bit more interactive than formal. But thank you, work group, for doing all this.
Thank you, Commissioner. And we probably have time for a couple more comments around. I will remind all of the commissioners that when you're using the chat function, you do need to send those messages to everyone, not just the host or the panelists, just for the record. Commissioner Chisholm.
Yeah, again, thank you to the engagement work group for figuring this out. This is just fantastic, and I love the idea of prompting questions. I do want to say though, and I'll bring this up again when we do the flow analytics piece where they're talking about the training of the mapping tools and so on. I would love, and I think quite a few of us would love, for the public's input on drawing of maps, and in particular of submitting completed maps that fit the criteria, as many maps as we can see that have different sort of core values or built on certain principles, or want to particularly emphasize a particular community of interest or something. I think there are quite literally an infinite number of ways to draw these maps, and I think the more ideas the better. So I would just encourage anyone listening and all the commissioners to spend some time figuring out how to draw your own maps and to meet the criteria, and then submit them to all of us. I think that's going to be a tremendously helpful process. Thank you. Thank
you, Commissioner. And are there any other just questions, points of feedback, comments as it relates to the current version, the current draft of the community engagement work groups planning? That, and I think, I'm not sure, Commissioner Hanson, if you mentioned this, this is all going into the community engagement work plan. So all of these details. So you'll see these reflected in a more formal document as well. Okay. Well, thank you. Oh, Commissioner Hanson.
And I just wanted to express gratitude for all of that and underscore what I had said at the end also of we really see this as very much a shared responsibility and a shared something that all of us can work on together. So, whether it's, Commissioner Manharaz's idea in the chat about reaching out to different local media sources, if you know someone or have this idea, Commissioner Fleischman, for how to make it fun, we want all of it. And we want you to feel ownership over different pieces of it as well, because it's gonna take all of us. So thank you.
Thank you. Adam, I am turning it over to you for the next agenda item for the public comment overview. The public comment period that just ended last week. Adam?
I think it's actually Commissioner Saxena.
Yeah, no, thanks, Autumn, and thanks everyone. Thanks to the work group. That was amazing work. So I'm going to take a moment now to report out on the public comment that we've received to date. So next slide, please. Okay, so staff have been coding public comments to the Independent District Commission, and they've come up with 5 categories or kind of general themes. And to date, the District Commission has received a total of 87 comments. There have been recommendations about geographic districts and district criteria. And so in that category, those are the public comments that mention ideas, recommendations, examples, or questions about the geographic district criteria for commissioners to consider, including comments about wanting districts that are of equal population or that have access to parks, et cetera. So 62% of the 87 public comments to the IDC have fallen into this category. The next category are comments mentioning the districting processing. So districting processing, that's the second category, and those are public comments that so 25% of the comments have fallen into this bucket. And overall, they're about the independent district commission's scope and process. And those include questions or comments about the timeline, engagement, district commissioners, voting, meetings, times, and schedules, et cetera. So that's that category. The third category is district-based offices. And that includes public comments that mention the physical workspaces of counselors, of city councilors, the location of district offices, the needs of city councilors to interact with their constituents. And that represented approximately 2% of the comments we received. The next category is district impacts. And those are comments that mentioned the impacts of geographic districts. And that includes mentioning the value of counselors working in the community, specific issues in a particular part of town, or any information related to data collection at the district level. This was the second largest category comment-wise, and that was about 36% of the comments. And finally, there's kind of a last category that was related to things that are no longer applicable or relevant, and that's for public comments that mention districts, but the comment was no longer applicable. So for example, the ballot measure set 4 districts with 3 counselors from each district. A few examples of comments that fell into this category were comments that did not want 3 commissioners for each district or wanted more or less than 4 districts. And 11% of comments that we received were no longer applicable. So they were based on things that had already been decided for some other reason were no longer applicable. Next slide, please. Okay. So for anyone wondering where the comments are coming from, you can see that we also broke them down by zip code. So it's important to note that zip code was the most convenient way to group public comments, since many of our public comments were submitted with an address. We've added neighborhoods for reference and also broke down the comments by quadrants, which are, there's now 6 quadrants in Portland. But we want to be clear that these groupings are strictly to show you that where the comments are coming from geographically and separate from any district criteria that we end up using to draw the districts. I just saw the comments. The percentages in the table represent the percentage of comments we have a zip code associated with. Of the 87 comments that we've received to date, roughly half of those were submitted with a zip code. So about 44 out of 87 had a zip code associated with them. So you'll see at the bottom, it says unknown, a little over 50% did not have a zip code associated with them. And also, as you can see here, the zip codes that had the highest response rate with over 13% of comments submitted was 97210, which is in Northwest Portland in the neighborhoods around Forest Park. 3 zip codes represented about 9% of the responses each, and those were 97202, which is inner Southeast, including Selwood and Creston, Kenilworth, 97215, and that's Mount Tabor and Montevilla, and 97217, which is Kenton and Overlook. Okay, next slide, please.
Commissioner.
A quick question about that.
Yes, yeah. Go ahead, Commissioner Chisholm.
Are these numbers based on the number of comments received or the number of people who submitted comments? In other words, if somebody submitted 5 separate comments, are they counted 5 times here or just once?
Well, that is an excellent question. I'm going to defer to our staff on that. Adam or Sophia, can you answer that?
Yeah, so that's of all the comments received. So yeah, multiple, but the comments could be coming from multiple folks. Sorry, same folks. Sorry. You got me.
So if one person submitted like 3 comments, they might be counted 3 times. Is that how that worked?
There are thumbs up saying yes.
Thank you.
Great. Sorry, I've got my notes in one
No problem.
thing and the Zoom in another. So let's see. Okay, so this slide shows a breakdown of all the comments we've received by date, by general region in Portland. And so similar to the prior slide, this is based on comments that we received that had a zip code attached to them. So if they didn't have a zip code, we couldn't assign a geographic area. And again, this represents about half of the public comments. And you can see most of the comments have come from Southeast Portland. So next slide, please. Okay, so since our vote this evening is on district criteria, we wanted to take a few minutes to look at some recurring themes that have popped up in the public comments around district criteria. Of all the public comments and testimony received to date, 62% mentioned district criteria, with the following themes being mentioned the most. The first theme that we saw a lot of comments kind of fall into were to ask the commission not to add any additional plan criteria. So a majority of the comments had this in them, and to stick with the criteria in the charter. The second theme that we saw, several comments around expressed a concern over the question posed by the Independent District Commission. So that question, which we'll recall, is should the commission be more explicit about the equitable distribution of public goods and services in the criteria? And again, because many respondents wanted no additional criteria, with others concerned that goods and services are not currently equitably distributed, this would make it difficult to, it would make it a difficult criteria to use in drawing districts. So a third theme that we saw was a focus on neighborhoods. Many of the comments submitted expressed concern over drawing district lines that break up neighborhood boundaries. And a few examples of the neighborhood boundaries included in comments were those that are defined by neighborhood associations, as well as specific neighborhoods like Montebello wanting to be included in an outer East Portland district as opposed to an inner East Portland district. So we saw that comment several times. I'll also want to note that all public comment reports are available on the IDC website, and we should encourage everyone to continue to submit comments as the process continues. So again, I hope this overview of comments received is helpful to inform our discussion on additional district criteria. So with that, I'm going to pass it back to our facilitator to get us started on the next agenda item. So thanks again, and I'm going to pass it back to you, Autumn.
Thank you, Chair Copeland. So in addition to your final point about the reports being available online, those reports include the verbatim comments made by the public too. So it's not just the summary, which is available online as well, but the actual comments by individual. Sorry, by comment, not by individual. So for the next hour or so, or up to an hour, I'm planning to discuss and deliberate the question of whether to add additional criteria to the existing base for the criteria that are required by the ballot measure itself. We'll need to leave probably at least 10 to 15 minutes or so, just in case there is a vote. So just kind of keep that in mind. We will have to make the discussion itself finite, but we want to take into consideration all of the discussions that the commission has had as a body, the comments and inputs that you received from the public, and also just your thinking around the technical requirements and the process that you'll need to follow in order to be able to draw maps. So I'll open up the floor and just start with a general question. given all that you've heard and given all that you've discussed, where are you currently? What are your current thoughts on whether to add additional criteria? And if so, what might those be?
I'm sorry, can you tell me again what I'm supposed to click to let you know that I want to talk?
Commissioner
Sorry.
Van, is that Commissioner Van Ness?
Yes, sorry.
No problem. So if you can raise your hand, especially if you're off camera, that's pretty much the only way.
well, I
But there's a
can-
little, yeah, at the bottom of your screen, depending on which version of the app you have, there's a reactions menu. And then if you click the little caret next to, or I think if you click the little smiley face,
Yeah,
there should be an
I'm
option to
sorry,
raise your hand.
Thank you.
Perfect.
And I already forgot what we were talking. Okay, so I just wanted to point out that
Commissioner,
Oh,
sorry to interrupt you. Commissioner Kimura actually already had her hand up.
oh, I'm
we'll
so
do-
sorry.
No,
I
you're
apologize.
all good. We're gonna go, so we'll start with Commissioner Kimura, and then we'll go to Commissioner Van Ness, and
Sure.
then Commissioner Siegel. And Commissioner Kimura, are you ready, or did you put your hand down?
No, I have to remember to put it, click it off, because otherwise it'll stay up there forever, as I am technically challenged.
You're not the only.
I would say frankly that although I am personally strongly would like to consider extra criteria, I think it would muddy the waters considerably. However, is there a way we can capture the comment for additional criteria? Because frankly, if you're talking about goods and services as a criteria, we know that they are not equally distributed. And to use that as a criteria, we would end up, I believe, we would end up gerrymandering the geographic districts. So that said, but I think that if people mention that as not being available as a criteria, we should take that comment and make a note of that. Thank you.
And I'm gonna pull the curtain back a bit. Amber, I apologize. I jumped right in, and we are co-facilitating.
It's okay. It's great. Keep going. It's wonderful.
I'm gonna hand it off to you after
Okay.
Commissioner Van Ness, and we'll do it. Sorry to be a little explicit about how we're doing this. Commissioner Van Ness.
Well, my comment might be moot or outdated at this point, but I spent some time reading today all of the public comments, and I can't help but see a lot of the same theme from people who are from what I would describe as the outer east part of the city, having concern that they are going to be put in a district that does not share their common what their interests and motives are. And I just want to, I know we're kind of jumping all over the place today, but this seems to be a common theme. And also, as a commissioner, I'm getting contacted by the public, people who know I'm on the commission, and I hear that over and over again. And I just want to make a point of that being something that I would like to have a discussion about at some point during these meetings. Thank you.
So Commissioner, would you like to, so in terms of the deliberation, because around the criteria itself, right? Would you like to just share a little bit more of the specifics? Because this is probably the time that you'd want to kind of share some more of the specifics around that discussion. We can consider them here. This is the vote we're considering, but all factors that are concerned should be on the table.
Sure. Frankly, I'm just not sure how to word that if, for the last several meetings, my view has been to oppose any added criteria. But I think I have been transparent in the past in saying that part of my motive in being on this commission is my feeling that the east part of the city has been neglected in the past, and that there's also in my opinion, and this is just a lay person's opinion from what I observe, that what is that a lot of people that I know that live on the outer east side of the city feel that what their views are is not represented by what is portrayed, let's say, in the media. So they feel like there's misrepresentation about what that part of the city actually wants, what their needs are. There's a disconnect. And so I don't know, when I'm not being very articulate. I don't know if there's an added criteria here, but I just want to be emphatic that I really think the east part of Portland should be a really strong focal point in this conversation.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Siegel, followed by Commissioner Wise and Chair Van Sickle-Robbins.
Thanks. Just a couple of observations, and since you asked where I'm coming from, is to suggest that we proceed without additional criteria, but also, continuing to accept and consider very, very seriously public input. With regard to the distribution of goods and services, our efforts at constructing a map have nothing to do with that. It's the decision makers that will be elected from these districts that will have the opportunity to better balance the provision of goods and services throughout the city. And again, we as political activists or political junkies or concerned citizens can do all we can to help emphasize and equalize provision of goods and services. Back to mapping and criteria. The public input received, and I read all of it as well, it didn't seem to be, there was no groundswell of any request for additional criteria. What I did see was an oft stated opinion or concern or desire that the integrity of neighborhood boundaries be respected and taken into consideration during the mapping exercise. So I think that pretty well sums up my comments on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Wise, and we'll have Chair Van Sickle-Robbins and Commissioner Judge following that order. Commissioner Wise?
Yeah, thanks, Autumn. Yeah, so I would say that currently I'm in favor of keeping the criteria as is. However, I have thought a lot about, what we should be doing in terms of what data and other and other viewpoints that we should be taking into consideration while drawing the maps. I do think that it is still important that we take a deep dive into what goods and services are available in certain areas. I'm from East Portland, and I would, I'm from Southeast Portland, and I would love more services around my neighborhood. It's and actually I think about it constantly. And so it's something that we should absolutely consider. My only fear is that, we tie our hands legally when we add things to the criteria. Although I would hope that that is something that we internally prioritize when considering how we draw the maps, and making sure that, and really, I kind of want to go deeper than that, not just the access to goods and services, but the quality of goods and services. Also, where I'm, I guess my neck of the woods, sometimes there are services, but the quality of those services are not that good. And so I do think that it was an important point that was brought up, and that we should actually pay close attention to. And really, I would actually want it to be a bit more fleshed out and for us to have a deeper set of conversations around what that means for us, and also what that can mean for the folks who would be representing those areas. And so, yeah, I think that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you. And Commissioner Van Sickle, and after Commissioner Judd, Commissioner Lorente, I see your hand as well. Chamber Sickle Robbins.
Yes, so I wanted to say that I agree with what was just said in terms of looking at all the comments that we have received so far, and what seems to be the kind of overwhelming approach is to not add district criteria. But I just wanted to say that I don't view that as a limitation. I actually see a big part of our job is soliciting as many data set overlays as possible from community members, so that, which is what we'll get as they describe how they view their communities, what kind of assets and deficits they are concerned about in their communities. And then we can look at how much data is available that allows us to overlay that on the Portland map. And I think at the end of the day, we're going to have to do a lot of weighing and balancing how we look at all of this data and look at the distribution of all of these different overlays across the city, and try and do the very best we can. As we've been told over and over in each meeting, there's not a perfect set of maps. We're going to have to make some compromises, undoubtedly, as we're arriving at the maps. And I look forward to all of those conversations about how we make those choices.
Thank you. So Commissioners Judd and Lorente, and then Commissioners Manjares and Baldini, I recognize you as well. Commissioner Judd.
Good evening, everyone. I'm just curious, just as a point of process, why is it necessary for us to make a determination of whether or not we add additional criteria at this point? It seems like we're at best, the middles, maybe end of the beginning in the process, and we really haven't heard from the community yet. So why couldn't we just reserve the right? And when I say, I want to make clear, as we talk about, we use the pronoun we, there's we that's sitting on these calls as part of the IDC, and there's we as we participate in the communities and engage with communities. And so we, the community, may have a amazing new criteria that we, the IDC, haven't heard yet. So I guess my question is, why do we have to make this decision now? Why can't we just reserve the right?
So my understanding from a legal perspective and a process perspective is that the decision, so there needed to be an early public hearing around district criteria and a deliberation around that item going forward. So that is required, that public hearing earlier on in the process, that is required under the ballot measure itself. The criteria, from a technical perspective, the demography team will use the established criteria to begin drawing maps. However, legally, the commission could theoretically add additional criteria later on as well. But the question around engaging publicly with the question for whether to add additional criteria, and if so, what might that look like? That process needed to include a public hearing, and this body was responsible for deliberating around that question too. So moving forward, you will need to give direction just from a technical and a process standpoint in terms of mapping and drawing additional maps. Your demographers will need to be able to know what the criteria are to ensure that the maps actually meet those criteria. And if the body does choose and vote to change the criteria down the road, that will also, of course, negate the existing maps. So that's from a technical, that's probably the best technical answer I can give you in terms of the requirements for on what you need to do on the required timeline. So of course, by September 1, have taken your vote. And if you have not, after 2 attempts to vote on the maps, if you have not approved one, then it'll go to council. The most recent map that was voted on, the most recent plan that was voted on would go to council for their consideration. Commissioner Judd, I don't know, is that sufficient? Response?
It's ample. I'm not sure if it answers the question of why we wouldn't be able to reserve the right. I get that as we go to have a discussion with the community, we have to be aligned on what the parent criteria is. And so it just feels like without having seen the data, without having conversations with the broader set of community, this decision may come back to, as you already alluded to, it may hamstring us a bit if we get some amazing feedback from the community. But I will agree to proceed as you have described. So appreciate it.
Thank you. Commissioner Lorente.
Thank you, Autumn, and good evening, everybody. I just wanted to share my position, having heard the comments we did. I would be in favor of keeping the criteria as is. I thought the feedback we received both in these meetings and submitted written, I thought that feedback was resoundingly clear that that equitable distribution of city resources is a valuable data point that we should certainly consider for the mapping process in this next phase of work. But we as a commission should refrain from adding that as a separate criteria. And that's just how I synthesized the feedback we heard. And I thought I was very pleased that so many of the comments we heard struck a thoughtful balance in juxtaposing those 2 points. And I thought community members articulated a number of really good reasons for why we should keep the criteria as is, including avoiding potential legal challenges to the maps that we produce for community, giving Portlanders flexibility to self-define communities of common interest, and also giving us as a commission flexibility to weigh what will certainly be very multifaceted considerations in our next phase of work. So I would be in favor of keeping the criteria as is.
Thank you, Commissioner. And I'm going to recognize a few hands before we go to Commissioner Baldini. So after Commissioner Baldini, we'll hear from Commissioner Van Ness, Commissioner Lumley, Commissioner Chisholm, and then Commissioner Fleischman in that order. Commissioner Baldini and Commissioner Manadas after that. Commissioner Baldini.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree with many of the points already made. And I just, in addition to the general feeling of the committee and the point that Commissioner Lorente just made excellently about the nuanced and important contributions from the public that we heard. I also wanted to note, as the professor in the group, I feel like it's my responsibility to go to the literature when we are facing questions like this. And I looked and looked and looked to try to figure out what would be the benefit of adding another criterion and to figure out, what would be the upside of this? And I couldn't find any. I found a lot of costs, a lot of potential dangers to the legitimacy of our final decision, potential hesitancy by the public to accept the final maps if we add things after the vote that had already established the criteria, had approved a certain set, and then we add another. I also found a general uncertainty because of I couldn't find an example, frankly, of a committee like ours that had added a criterion and had chosen to do that to themselves. And I know there are lawyers in our crew, so if you know of a city like ours that did this and I missed it, please feel free and raise it or let me know. But it seemed like the literature was pretty unified in saying there's no benefit to this. And that doesn't mean that we're not going to pay attention to the very important point of goods and services and all the other things we're worried about. It just means this particular fencing ourselves in does not seem to be beneficial to the final acceptance of the product or in our success. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Van Ness, followed by Commissioner Lumley.
Thank you. And part of what I'm about to say is in the context of wanting to encourage Portlanders to serve on these commissions in the future. I think we can all agree that we want good people to give up their time, their valuable time away from their families and their friends, to serve our beautiful city. And in that context, my question is, can we just vote on this already? I mean, we have exhausted this. I still am not entirely sure what goods and services or if that's been described, but I will tell you that as someone who lives in Southwest Portland, if restaurants are part of goods and services, I assure you that the southwest part of the city is lacking in goods and services. So can we move on? I mean, and I'm saying that genuinely, sincerely, because there are a lot of people watching. There are a lot of neighborhood association people that are active in our community that I want to encourage to sign up for the next commission. And I feel like at some point we just have to we got to talk turkey, is what we say in the legal biz. So that's my comment.
Thank you, Commissioner. And I would like to remind the full commissioner, citing guidance from the city attorney, I think 2 meetings ago, you actually do not need to vote to not adopt additional criteria. You would only need to vote if you are going to move to adopt additional criteria, just a process.
So can we stop this dialogue altogether?
Well, no, I still have 3 commissioners with hands raised and they do want to weigh in. So I'll let that process play out. But once the deliberation is final and everyone's at a comfortable point, we'll gauge whether or not there's interest in moving to add additional criteria. Commissioner Lumley.
Thank you. I have a question, a comment, and another question. So my first question is that we're meeting again next week on the 19th, and I saw in the framework that in the month of April is when we vote on whether or not to add new criteria. So what is happening at the meeting on the 19th?
I'm going to pull up the agenda right now, unless Sophia, you have it up first. But I believe, so the current, and by the way, the current agenda is not set. So in the basic work plan, by that meeting, I believe the plan is to be able to have the initial, some early maps to review. But other than that, the specific items, I believe, have not been set. Sophia, can you confirm or add?
Yes, so actually Flow Analytics will talk a little bit later today in our agenda about what that process will look like. But yes, we'll begin looking at maps beginning at the meeting on the 19th.
So then this is the meeting where if we're to add new criteria, we vote on it now. This is our opportunity. Okay, got it. Thank you. So there were some excellent comments earlier about concerns about adding new criteria. I agree with all those comments. I really appreciated the public input because it gives us a sense of data sets that people want us to focus on. So I'm in favor of keeping the criteria unchanged. Here's my last question, which is, I know we need to vote to add new criteria. Not voting is an answer, but could we also vote to table? That had the same effect as ending the discussion? Because I've got a feeling we're probably heading in the direction of not adding new criteria.
I would see that motion probably after the last 2, if these are the
Not
final
now,
2
I'm just asking
commissioners.
with that. Yeah, I just want to know if that's a pathway.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna do it now.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's minimal. Thank you,
Okay,
Commissioner.
thank you.
Commissioners Fleischman and Manadas, and then I'll pause here just to say it does appear that we are starting to converge toward the end of the deliberation. If anyone else would like to speak, see Commissioner Siegel, you just raised your hand. Probably now is the time to jump in. Commissioner Fleischman.
Thank you. I also support the idea that we have heard and should proceed to determine that we do have sufficient criterion, don't need to add another criterion to the list. But I wanted to say I wanted to share 3 thoughts with my fellow commissioners. First, Commissioner Van Nest, I also really love the opportunity to participate in this public process, and I'm glad that there are others who are not on the commission who are listening in, and encourage them to also participate. And one of the things that I share your desire to get to action at the same time as I love being in dialogue with my fellow commissioners. So I think that for me, it feels important to kind of share our views and kind of have everybody if not be in agreement, at least feel like we're moving in the right direction. So I wanted to just direct 2 ideas, share 2 ideas with 2 fellow commissioners. First, Commissioner Judd, I really appreciated your question. So I wanted to say, as I thought about like what would be a decent answer or reply or thought to the question you posed, it was that it's kind of, we've gotten to a foundational decision that allows the next steps to be taken. And so it feels important for us to kind of have some closure to set some direction. That's how it felt to me, particularly since kind of the sense is right now, no additional criterion are required. And so, I think that where we'll be playing out kind of the desire to really be responsive to the Portland community will be in kind of in those data sets and in hearing voices and making sure that everybody's included in the process, even more than kind of whether we add a criterion or not. So that's how I thought about trying to think through the question you posed. And then Commissioner Siegel, I heard you reference kind of neighborhood boundaries being an important consideration. In my reading of the public comments, that was not a uniform, I didn't read them as a uniform endorsement. I did hear some concerns about taking traditional neighborhood boundaries, a kind of that they were drawn at a time where they might have been arbitrary and exclusionary in some ways. And so I also heard at least one note of caution about that, although I do agree with you that there were a number of comments that said that this is really important, but I didn't hear it as being everybody who weighed in kind of saying this was a positive element to consider and incorporate. So just keep it at that. I just wanted to be responsive to my 2 fellow commissioners, or 3 fellow commissioners, and their comments.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Manjarrez, followed by Commissioner Siegel.
Great, thank you. Put my hand down, it will stay up forever. So having suggested that we ask the public the question about whether to be more explicit about whether we should state equitable distribution of goods and services as a part of their criteria, I just want to express my appreciation for folks really taking the question seriously and grappling with it. I think that was the intent. It was really important, I think, to hear feedback from folks and to have people really think about what that would mean and look like in practice. I also hope that it encourages folks to look up what we mean when we say things like goods and services. I think that's really important for all of us to think deeply about. I also really appreciated hearing how important this data is for folks and how we should consider it in this process. But I really resonate with Commissioner Kimura's comment about not muddying the waters. And I think that was really clear to me in the public hearing and even in the comments that have been made. When we were thinking about how to ask this question in the public, I felt like it was important to be clear about distribution versus access, not get into policy questions, think about things through an asset-based lens. And I can see that we have a ways to go. But just hearing the confusion there, I think is really something we don't want to get into. The purpose from my view was to actually clarify some of these points and to make sure that that data set actually had a home. But I also did hear, from the public also, and really want to honor the feedback of the majority who said that they would really like to stick with the current criteria as it's currently worded. So I would feel very comfortable with proceeding with the existing criteria, but really wanted to just appreciate folks for the conversation and debate. When I posed that, I didn't realize it was going to have such an effect, but it's been really great. And it's actually helped me to really think deeply about this and to really confirm my own reasons for thinking about different data sets. And I look forward to the opportunity to have conversations about what we mean by those and to really bring that lens as we're looking to different maps to start to look at where are goods and services, what is the Portland we want to look at, how are we thinking about this in the sense of, the fact that we're actually creating districts from scratch. Because I do think that's a distinction from this group versus what other groups have had to deal with in other redistricting committees, not necessarily districting committees. So again, just want to appreciate the conversation and everyone's engagement, and just be explicit that I do support proceeding with the existing criteria as worded.
Thank you, Commissioner. And Commissioner Siegel.
Thank you. So I'd like to make a motion that's reflective of our discussion and to help move us along. I move that we approve the use of our existing criteria and not add additional criteria at this time.
Okay.
I
Do I have a
second.
Are you
I
sure you want to do
second.
that?
I think that was Commissioner Van Ness. I'll recognize the second. Okay, so is there any opposition to, how did you frame it? Sorry, Commissioner Slagle. Essentially,
Can I ask a question?
not adding additional criteria at this time.
Can I ask a question about
And
the motion
Commissioner
maker?
Lumley.
Yeah.
Oh, of
So-
the motion maker.
Of the motion maker, yeah, you added at this time, which makes it sound like we could come back later and add criteria, which I think would be, in my opinion, disruptive. Was it your intent to leave open the option of adding criteria at a later date?
All things are possible, but no. Actually, I want to move ahead. The intent of the motion was to approve the use of our existing criteria and not add additional criteria.
So
Full stop.
I was after you had your hand up, I was going to make a motion after you were done to actually table the conversation about adding district plan criteria, which would be more permanent.
I just clarified what the motion was. So not
Okay.
considering additional criteria. Thank you.
Yeah, so the current motion on the table is to not adopt, or is it to not consider?
Would you be
So not
willing to remove
adopt
the
additional.
words? Would you be able to remove the words at this time?
That's what I agreed to. Yes.
Okay, and
So
would
the current
Commissioner Van Ness agree to that also?
Yes, 100%.
Okay,
The current motion on the table is to move forward and not consider, not to add additional criteria. Have a second? And is
I'll
there,
put it in writing if you like. I'll put it in writing if you like, but it's basically, I move that we approve the use of our existing criteria and not add additional criteria.
approve the use of the existing criteria and not add additional criteria? Thank you, Commissioner Siegel.
And I'll
I
put
haven't had
that, I'll
enough
put in.
Pepsi
the chat
tonight.
as well.
Okay, perfect. All right, any opposition to the motion? Okay, seeing none, the motion passes. And we'll move to the next item after a break. Okay. Perfect. So we'll come back, we'll reconvene at 7:30. I've rounded a little bit in 9 minutes, but that'll help us stay on top. So thank you all. for the deliberation, and we will have Flo join us for the next item in about 9 minutes. We're going to reconvene in about a minute. Okay, commissioners. Seeing folks come back. And Portland Building folks. Okay. So is the flow team ready? I think Sophia, was that a thumbs up? Okay. So we're going to have a technical presentation from Flow Analytics, which will be actually drawing the map based on the criteria, the district criteria that are established. So they'll be providing an overview of mapping tools, including District R, and we'll also have a discussion around what the commission would like to see in the first draft maps. So again, this discussion will help to provide direction for the Flow Analytics team. All right. Kimmy,
Thanks, Autumn.
I'll pass it over to you, Nikki.
I'm going to share my screen. Kimmy, you got anything before I start?
No.
Great. Can I get a thumbs up if everyone can see my screen? Great.
Perfect.
All right. So we're going to go through some slides and exercise first on kind of the mechanics of redistricting here. So I'm not going to linger on this slide too long because it's one that y'all have seen before. We wanted to show this as we get into this, as you start thinking about some of these examples, the criteria we have, and then the data on the right side that either are examples or explicitly help us measure these criteria. So in this example, we're just going to do a generic set of districts. And in this case, we're looking at 5, but in the city of Portland, it's going to be 4. So what we're looking at here is just a really basic generic map on the top right, and then a table of some statistics that are going to help us get a sense if this set of 5 districts is balanced by population. You can see here that overall range, also called overall deviation, it's in the third column, it's 12.9%. That's over, you recall, what we're looking to be under is 10% under, near to 0 really as possible. So we need to get this definitely lower than 12.9%. And the district that's highlighted, District 1, is the most underpopulated district. It's about 20,000 underpopulated. So a tactic to get this district some more population is to add area. So to do that, I want to look at which district has the most population over the ideal, which is District 3. You can see that it's roughly 20,000 over that ideal population. So in this case, we maybe want to move some area from District 3 into District 1. So you might think, let's do something like move this orange area from District 3 to District 1. But I think we all know that that's not possible, because District 1 would then not be contiguous. It wouldn't have connection between those two green areas. So another thing we could look at is if there's any way to make a change that would have District 1 be contiguous. And we can see with District 4, it's also a little underpopulated, but it could help facilitate some movement of District 3's area to District 1. So we can imagine moving that orange area again from District 3. But as you can see on the map, this just really wouldn't be that compact. You'd have District 1 having this sinuous piece move to the north just to get some area from District 3, and that would kind of infringe upon that criteria of the districts being compact. So District 4, as I mentioned, could take on some population from District 3 and allowing District 1 to take on population from District 4. So maybe think about how we can move some area from District 3 to District 4, hypothetically, this orange area. And if we did that, we would also want to be considering other things like dividing communities of interest. So just so happens I didn't show this, but there's this purple community of interest area. Moving that orange area would divide the community of interest. So we wouldn't want to do that. So maybe we go back to the drawing board and we say, well, let's move the whole community of interest from District 3 to District 4. And that would be perfectly valid. So now District 4 has too much population. It's over that ideal, but that's part of our strategy here, is to get enlarged District 4. So then District 4 can then cede some of its area to District 1. So perhaps we'd want to move something like that blue area from District 4 to District 1. But it turns out there's a geographic feature, a river flowing right there along that boundary. So having that kind of jagged boundary, it's not following existing geographic or political boundaries. So we'd want to revise that and move that whole area using the river as a boundary and move that district from District 4 to District 1. Now, when we see in the end the statistics, we have an overall range now that's below 10% at 6.6. We got District 1 population to be underpopulated by about 10 to 11,000. District 3 is now over by about 9 to 10,000. And you can see how those changes we made keep the districts contiguous, packed. It's respecting the communities of interest. It's using the existing boundaries of rivers, other geographic political features, and we got it to lower that overall deviation. Commissioner Van Ness?
I'm sorry, but are you just giving hypotheticals, or are you, because my understanding is that this is a commissioner-driven commission, and so this is sounding to me like you're making suggestions on what we're supposed to be doing as far as the 4th district. I'm confused about what's happening here.
This isn't Portland.
Yeah, this isn't Portland. This is just a purely hypothetical area showing how you could balance population between districts.
Sure. But the river issue is what concerned me. If you could go over again what you were talking about with the river being the issue.
Oh, sure. Yeah, so like in this slide here, I was showing the strategy to move some area from District 4 to District 2. And hypothetically, it could be this area in blue dashed line that's got a very jagged boundary on that left side. And that just isn't using the existing geographic and political boundaries in this hypothetical situation. There's a river right there, and it might be better to adhere to the criteria and follow that existing geographic boundary. Does that clarify things?
I'm sure it will as you go on. Thank you.
Sure, and it didn't have to be a river. It could have been a major highway. It could have been anything that is an existing geographic or political boundary. So I want to get into just a few more details on census blocks really quick. So we see in this example that we're still at 6.6% overall range and deviation. We want to get that a little bit lower. So we might want to look at District 3 and District 1, the boundary, and see if we can get those populations to be closer to the ideal. Just a reminder that the smallest geography that we'll be working with is a census block. So we have enumerations from 2020 census for all census blocks. In this example, you can see some that are very small. They are literally city blocks, and then some that are a little bit larger. So what we have, is the population, total population per census block. And now in this detailed example, maybe we can find some census blocks that would make sense to move from District 3 to District 1. So if we want to move a group of census blocks, it's highlighted in kind of an orange brown color here. We're going to try to move that from District 3 to District 1. But an important point is highlighted in blue on the map is there's a portion of a really large census block that's kind of included in our selection that we want to move from District 3 to District 1. And we can't do that because we don't know the population of that portion of the census block. We got to move the whole thing. There's no splitting census blocks. So I just want to hit that point one more time before we see some maps later today. So when we're thinking about moving things around, moving area from one district to another, we're thinking about whole census blocks. So once we did that and we selected a certain amount of census blocks we wanted to move, we got that overall deviation down to 3%. That's much closer to 0. It's where we want to be. Now here are just some of the summaries, we call it summary statistics, that's going to help us measure the criteria. So this is going to be something you're going to be accustomed to seeing. It's a PDF printout. We have this is example data. What's not an example is that ideal population on the left, 163,126. That is the population we're going to want to have the 4 districts be. And in this hypothetical, you can look on the right side. You see each district has its total population, the over, under, the ideal, and their deviation. So one of the commissioners want to shout out what the overall deviation in this hypothetical would be?
3.8.
That's correct. And we got there by finding the least populated district, District 2, and summing its deviation with the most populated, District 4, so 2.3 plus 1.5. Thank you. So we'll also be having not just total population statistics, but on each of these summaries, there'll also be statistics on total population broken down by the race and ethnicity categories from the Census Bureau. So that will be presented as total population, as well as citizen voting age population, which you see in the bottom left. So you just think about that. It's different, different universe of population, so to speak. It's total population versus citizen voting age population is anyone over 18. The citizen part comes from American Community Survey. So it's not a question that was asked on the 2020 census. So these are estimates, but it's part of the process as we consider when considering the Voting Rights Act. Some additional items.
A couple questions there.
Do you mind if I pause you? Commissioner Kimura and then Commissioner Chisholm, it looks like they have questions or comments.
Thank you.
Commissioner Kimura.
Thank you. Are we going to be able to get information? If we're saying that we need to divide, we make sure that the division point is a census tract. I can see somebody deciding that they're going to take all of the geographic census tracts that are on the border and start minusing and plussing. Do you have that level of detail, or can you get that level of detail? I don't know if we're ever going to come up with, but I know enough people who spend time doing this kind of stuff, that might be a factor, and that you need to be clear that it is by census tract population rather than all of Southeast Uplift or something on that order? I'd just like a little clarity on that. Thank you.
Yeah, if I'm understanding correctly, yes, we have the census population data for census blocks, which are smaller than census tracts, even smaller. So we have all those building blocks. I think we'll see them in action in just a little bit when we look at the public facing tool called Districtor, which will allow someone to create a district plan based on census blocks with their total population, and it adds it up for the user so they can get the total population for a district.
Thank you.
Commissioner Chisholm?
Yeah, these are great summary statistics that we'll get on each map that is we consider. Can we also get summary statistics for each map that we consider that are related to either language groups and secondly, based on socioeconomic factors? Can we see things like free and reduced lunch populations in each district, or average median something income, family income? Is there a way to get those kinds of statistics as well as the race and ethnicity district stats for each district?
Yeah, I think that gets back to the discussion of criteria. So those standing kind of outside of the official criteria.
I'm not asking about criteria. I'm asking about, as we develop maps, can we get statistics about the districts that we've produced? We were just having a conversation about how equitable distribution of services, we want to consider that data, but not make it a criteria. So I'm asking about, can we get data on these districts separate from a criteria question?
Sure, I'm understanding. Yes, and not necessarily to be making decisions to draw maps, but rather after the fact review. Yeah, with definition from the commission on which statistics would be helpful. I think that is possible. Yep.
There's one more. Chair Vincent Robbins.
Yes, I just wanted to dive a little bit deeper into the census block consideration, because if I remember correctly, we had at least one public comment where the individual did not want us to use census blocks and instead use neighborhood association boundaries. And my guess would be that neighborhood boundaries and neighborhood association boundaries may not have considered census blocks in drawing those boundaries versus, I'm assuming, and correct me if I'm wrong, that existing political boundaries, like for Multnomah County's zones or for legislative districts, they would have considered census blocks or used census blocks in drawing those?
You're correct. There are a reasonable amount of boundaries, such as neighborhoods, that won't follow 2020 census blocks exactly. But because of the nature of Portland and being kind of more of a dense urban area, a lot of them will follow pretty closely. So when we get into the map examples, we'll be able to see the census blocks alongside things such as the neighborhood boundaries. And for the most part, you're gonna be able to have census blocks that represent neighborhoods fit into one district and keeping a neighborhood relatively whole. Yeah.
This gets to my question I asked maybe 2 or 3 meetings ago. Is it possible to split a census block in order to match another boundary? Neighborhood might be one of them, school district might be another. And the answer, I think it's a good answer, was no, you can't do that because the smallest sort of Lego brick we have to build with is the census block. And if we cut it in half, we don't know how many humans are on each side of the pieces that we broke apart. That said, having done some of this mapping myself, just playing around, our census blocks are so tiny that you get a really, as Alex said, you get a really close approximation to what you're after.
That's correct.
And I did want to confirm, it is in the minutes from March 13th, the March 13th meeting. The guidance from the city attorney is that while legal the practice of splitting, courts have found that the practice of splitting census blocks is highly problematic and it would be against established best practices. So. Okay. Alex, I think you're good to continue if there are no other questions.
Great, thank you. So some of the other things we can look at, I think exactly to this question, is what we've written as a preservation of geographic integrity of criteria. It's really simply just meaning, let's have a look at all the neighborhoods in Portland, and for a given plan, which neighborhoods are kept whole versus which may be split between two or multiple districts. So in this hypothetical example, you can see that neighborhoods, there are a total of 123. 112 of them are wholly within a district. So that's 91% of all of them. And then we can see on the right, the list of them that are divided, maybe just slightly, but between multiple districts. So that's going to help you guys, when we run these statistics, see, are there some neighborhoods that are just very large and it just isn't feasible to get them all in one district or another? Or, you know, when you make your first district draft map, or look at ones from the public, you can use this list and say, well, let's go tackle Park Rose and make sure that it is all in district A, B, C, or D. So that's something we'll have. And in this example, we just have a couple other boundaries, such as voting precincts and school districts. But it's something we can take a look at with some of the other important boundaries that you want to look at.
What is COI? Is that community of interest?
Community of interest, yep. So in these packets of summary stats, the last page will be a map. In this case, we don't have one yet, so this is just going to show the whole city of Portland. But we will quickly see some examples once we get into Districtr. I did want to mention that we already have a web mapping application on the District Commission website. So I'm just going to do a quick demo of that, but this is how you get to it. From the main page, you click on that District Maps and Additional Data tab. It's going to bring you to this page where you can look at a user guide. It's a PDF, and you can then launch the map application in a browser. So the user guide looks like this. It's a snapshot right out of it. It's a fairly basic web map, but there are widgets along the corners and sides, so you can do things that you are used to doing in things like Google Maps, like zooming in and out, returning to a home screen, changing base map. But then there are a lot of layers to be able to turn on and off. These are things that we heard from you in earlier meetings that you're interested in seeing overlaid with census information to help draw the draft maps. So this is just one example where you can look at neighborhood boundaries. In this case, are turned on, as is the census population. It's being shown by the density of population in each census block. So it gives you a sense of how small some of these are. They really are city blocks. And then you can overlay that with things like neighborhood boundaries and everything. Most things that we've discussed and that you've requested are in there, and they're organized by the data source, such as City of Portland, or what we're looking at now is the Metro Regional Land Information System, also called ARLIS. And that's a manager of a lot of Portland Metro Geographic Information System data. I see a hand up from, I think, Commissioner Van Ness.
Thank you. It would be very helpful for me if we could have like notebooks of all of this information, printed copies in like a 3-ring binder with dividers that explain sort of what we're looking at. It's very hard for me to be able to decipher what I'm looking at in this context. I can't, I mean, this just, you know, some of us are a little older than others, and so I would ask the staff that's listening, that would be very helpful if all of the data can be provided in hard copy, at least for me. That would be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Staff has noted the request. Thanks, Commissioner.
I just wanted to, yep, if there's no other questions.
I think you're good, Alex.
Thanks, Autumn. Just wanted to show this slide. There's going to be kind of different views of when we see maps. So when Flow staff are going to be working on maps, we're working in a software called Esri ArcGIS. So it's going to be kind of help us do a little bit more of the technical work. We're going to be able to work with all the data that's available in the web application from the census, from Metro Arliss, from the city. I just wanted to show this view because sometimes when we actually get down to drawing draft maps and a commissioner asks, can we, make this change or get the statistic on the number of population within a certain neighborhood, this is something you guys kind of might see us working in. But at this point, I want to pass it over to Kimmy so she can discuss the public facing web map called Districtr.
Sure. So the public facing mapping tool that the commission will be using is called Districtr. It was released in this past redistricting cycle, and it was pretty widely used actually across the country. It was developed by MGGG Redistricting Lab, which is part of Tufts University. And it is designed to be extremely user-friendly to enable people really to be able to just draw maps very easily and quickly, and also to identify communities of common interest. And then it acts as also a vehicle to provide the commission with any feedback on existing maps. Maps that are drawn on the Districtr site will be downloaded and analyzed by Flow. And if you look on the Districtr site, when we get there later, there are actually 3 maps already up that have been submitted by members of the public. So this is the landing page for it. And you notice there's a tag at the top that says Portland 2023. It is pretty important that if folks do submit maps through Districtr, that you use this particular landing page. It's difficult for us to find maps if they're submitted elsewhere in Districtr. Okay. Next slide. So there are a couple.
Where's the link to that?
It's actually at the end of this very few slides that we have. And it's on actually the commission's website, and I'll show you how to get there as well. Just want to review really quickly because this isn't an incredibly difficult software, but there are a few components. This is the base page. So when you click into drawing a map, this is what you'll see. Next slide. And so you'll see that there are under the word boundaries, there are 3 what we call data layers. And so we can upload, there is an option to upload an additional data layer, but as you'll see when we start looking at the data layers, it can make the maps a little bit cluttered and difficult to read the more data you have on there. So we'll show that in just a few minutes. Next slide. Okay, so this is the map with the voter precincts on it, and precincts are larger than census blocks. So bear that in mind when you're taking a look at this map. Next slide. And so this is the neighborhood organization map. And I think that when you zoom in to this layer, you'll get a much better sense of kind of how the census blocks relate to the neighborhoods. Next slide. And these are school district boundaries. As you can see, Portland Public Schools takes up the majority of the city, but there are other school district boundaries that come into play. And so I think it's important to see those. Next slide. So under boundaries, you have demographics. And so this Districtr will show either through shaded regions or there's actually another option that we'll go through when we go to the live version. And it will show you the demographic layers for race and ethnicity. This particular option gives you, or this particular page rather, gives you the ability to select population groups, and it will show you the density of that population across the city. You can select any of the groups under this. It has a drop-down menu where it says variable, and then you can also choose how you display that information. Next slide. And so this slide is to highlight what they call the coalition builder. And really what it is it gives you the opportunity to select more than one race or ethnicity. If there are, say, communities of interest that might be representative of both Hispanic, Latino populations, as well as, say, an American Indian population. So it gives you the opportunity to build these coalitions and to see where they might fit in the cities. It is particularly helpful when we're discussing communities of interest to be able to see where they are and where they reside in terms of being able to map them and for purposes of building districts. Okay, next slide. So this is actually a screenshot of the commission website. If you go to the middle one that says draw and submit district map. Next slide. And then you go down to where it says click here to access, and then that'll take you directly into the landing page for the city's districtor instance. Okay, so this is where we get to do some live map drawing. And I think, Alex, you get to, oh. Okay, so give me 1 second. I'll get the slide up. Sorry, technical difficulties today.
While we're waiting, just to confirm, this instance of Districtor is built on census blocks and on 2020 data. Is that right?
Yes, that's what we are required to use. Okay, can everybody see this square of Districtor? Great.
Yes, and Kimmy, before you jump in, I see a question from Commissioner Judd.
Yeah, and this is just purely, I'm just asking a question. If the least common denominator for mapping is census blocks, why was it not communicated as a criterion, or at least footnoted in some way that that's the least common denominator? Perhaps it was and I missed it, but that was a question earlier asked about again the public comments stating that there's some splitting there that happens because of community associations. I'm just curious of why that wasn't defined as the least common denominator as a criterion.
So my best recollection is that we did discuss using census blocks early on in the process. They are sort of the building blocks for districting, creating districts and redistricting processes, and they are sort of the standard unit that's used when we draw district maps or for the redistricting processes later on. So I know that we had mentioned it before, and I don't know if maybe we should have been a little bit clearer about that, but census blocks are, because they're the smallest unit, they are what we typically use to build the districts, because it provides us an ability to be able to be slightly more exact than, say, census tracts, which are much bigger, or census blocks or precincts. And so,
I understand the context and I understand what it is. My only question is, if it's not explicitly defined as a criterion within the criteria, so the community members may not understand that if they aren't privy to this, because it is the least common denominator. We can't break those by best practice, and no one's asking you to break those. But again, if there's someone out there, and again, it came up in the public comments, that there are associations that overlap community blocks or census blocks. I'm just curious why it wasn't explicitly stated as a criteria, understanding that it is, and there's a blurb in the criteria that says use current political and geographical
boundaries.
Boundaries. But it seems like that might be a key point that would help community members understand that least common denominator that must be included?
So
I'll just jump in real quick and say it's a good question because a lot of their districting projects I've worked on, it's not explicitly stated in criteria because the criteria is looking at measuring the difference between total population per district. And there's many different geographies to do that with census data. It could be with tracts, block groups, census blocks for the statistical areas. It could be you're working in a state and you're looking at congressional districts, you might be using places to begin with, or a larger entity like counties. So there's not a geographic unit stated per se, but as Kimmy mentioned, the smallest is, what we can use and maybe want to use because it's how we can make this as exact as possible when drawing the boundaries. So suffice to say, I'm not that surprised that it's not explicitly stated in the criteria.
yeah, and I just want to just clarify because I did read what was legal guidance from the city attorney. It was not stating that it was a criterion, as you pointed out, it's not. And of course, the ballot measure does establish, the commission obviously established criteria and then proposed those to the public, and those were approved. So we wouldn't want to speculate as to kind of why they did certain things. It's just that we have these criteria that exist. And so the legal guidance was that splitting, while technically an option, is legally courts have not upheld that as a best practice when it comes to mapping. So that's the distinction there. And that was guidance from the city attorney's office given on March 13th. I just wanted to clarify that because I did introduce it earlier. Commissioner Chisholm.
Alex, you may know this number or you may not, but do you happen to have a sense of how many census blocks there are in the city of Portland? That might be a helpful way for folks to understand the scale of what we're talking about here.
Yeah, I don't have it off the top of my head, but I'll certainly get it for you.
It's probably in the several thousand kind of zone, right?
Oh yeah.
Another way of asking it, Alex, how many people might live in a typical census block? Or what's the range perhaps?
Yeah, I can get the range for Portland specifically, because there's kind of like for the census as a whole across the US, there's kind of a very broad amount, but I can certainly pull that information.
I was just poking on that, and it's like most of the census blocks have like 25, 35, 50 people in them. There are a handful that have hundreds. Those are mostly dorms at colleges. But yeah, they're tiny generally.
And Commissioner Fleischman and followed by Commissioner Van Ness. Commissioner Fleischman.
Thank you. I think this is a little bit of an expansion. Commissioner Judd, I don't know whether this entirely answers the question you posed, but in the notes from the minutes from the meeting on criteria, there was a question: is the use of full census blocks need to be listed as an additional criteria? And the response, and I actually don't know who provided the response, but it was the answer was, this is not necessary because the use of census blocks is typically how mapping is done. I don't know whether that helps. I take the point, which is that we need to be clear in explaining this as we go out and talk about this, but at least that was some of my recollection about how the answer was provided.
Thank you, Commissioner. And Commissioner Van Ness.
Hi, Alex, and the other members of the vendors who are supporting us. I was just curious, who of them are from Portland, live in Portland, have lived in Portland, or if you could share where you do live or what your connection to Portland is.
Yeah, I can go first. I live in Portland. I've lived here since 2015. I live on the Near East Side, and let's see. Kimmy, I'll let you go, but then I know we can maybe talk about a couple of other members of Flow that might be joining us, because I can think of a couple. One that is a long-time Portlander who could maybe involved in the project.
Yeah,
And
sure.
also-
So,
Sorry, go ahead, please.
okay. So I'm actually based outside of Sacramento, California. Our home office is in Portland, so I'm in Portland quite often. And in addition to that, our Portland staff, we have several of them who are our GIS staff will be working on the mapping and the data analysis. And then I think Charles Reinerson is who you were going to mention. He joined our staff from Portland State University from the Public Research Center. And so he'll also be involved in this project, particularly when it comes to the map analysis.
Okay,
So-
and along those same lines, if you could share what other cities that are comparable in size you've assisted in this sort of process, I think that would be helpful as well.
Sure. So we have, Alex and I have a little bit different range of experiences just because I was working with a different firm during this last cycle. But I can tell you that I would say in terms of size off the top of my head, City of Berkeley, City of Oakland, City of Redwood City, which are all in California, obviously. I think that this particular process, to be honest with you, is a little bit unique because it is districting. It was ballot approved, and because you are entering into the ranked choice voting piece, which also makes it a very unique process as well. Although I will say that Berkeley and Oakland also have ranked choice voting, but they've had it, I think, for a little bit longer, and they were already districts, so it was a redistricting process for them. Alex?
Yeah, well, I've been involved in a number of projects that for this last redistricting cycle that I guess aren't just cities, but because we've done a lot of counties in Washington, as well as County of San Diego, but cities of similar size, Reno, Nevada's coming to mind, New Orleans. So yeah, other large cities, but also larger counties in Washington. And all the way down to school districts, because when school districts do this for their directors or other special districts in Washington.
Thank you. Commissioner Manhattan? Oh, Commissioner Manhattan, are you?
Yes, sorry, I was having trouble with the button.
No problem.
I just wanted to, I guess, bring us back to the point at hand. And if we need biographies and other information from the folks who are presenting the information, then we should make that request. But I'm feeling a little bit uncomfortable with the insinuation and what I'm perceiving as sort of an attack on the presenters or a questioning of their integrity. So I just want to bring us back to the question about census blocks and not assume best intent about the folks who are presenting. But if we do have a request for bios, I'm sure folks will be willing to offer that. And just wanted to offer with the census tracts data, this confusion, and again, this kind of goes back to the previous question we had about criteria. This is sort of a data literacy question about what do we consider criteria? What do we consider data? What do we use? How do we capture data? How do we do that systematically? So I think it's important for us to think about what data is used for these kinds of purposes. How are we going to systematically capture that data, understanding that this is a process that happens every 10 years? And understanding that this is not just about the city of Portland, this is also about the county, this is also about the state, this is also about the federal government, and this is just widely accepted practice in terms of how we build maps. And so if folks have other data to offer, I understand that the neighborhood association maps were brought up, and I think that's important data for us to consider and overlay. But I'm not really sure how often those maps are updated. I'm not sure what the criteria is. So I just want to bring us back to the question we're asking about how we're building maps. And I wanted to interrupt a little bit what I felt like was a little bit of an attack on the presenters. So it's making me uncomfortable. So I just wanted to name that out loud.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioners Lumley and Judd, respectively. Commissioner Ullman?
Thank you. I just wanted to echo the comment from Commissioner Matt. I definitely believe that the presenters here are highly qualified and professional. Several are from Portland. They know Portland. I'm very comfortable with this exercise. I just want to also point out during the conversation, I went into the public gallery. There's 4 options to look at. And I think the next step would be for the presenters to walk us through. I found it fascinating just looking at the different maps, and I encourage us to move along and start looking at maps.
Thank you, Commissioner. And Commissioner Judd.
Yep. Just want to reiterate the request we made a couple of sessions ago that, again, as we start getting into the maps and to the point around, how fresh is this data? What are the underlying definitions? Just getting that metadata would be extremely important as we sort of begin to navigate through the definitions and really kind of understanding how to build out using the building blocks of census blocks. It'd just be helpful to have that metadata.
Thank you, Commissioner. And Kimmy, I saw you nodding. Is there a way to make that either, as we're thinking about different maps, can you make the metadata available or detail it in a format, either within DistrictR or in a different format?
That I'm not sure about. I will have to talk to DistrictR, and I think Alex and I probably need to have that conversation with them. So I know that their data is based on census data from 2020. It is what we need to use to create districts and for the redistricting processes. So
real quick point, Kimmy, when we get in, there is, so the census data is all straight from the Census Bureau. It's flow prepared and we provided to districtors. So we're very confident that that is the correct 2020 census data. For a little bit more of context, for some of those boundaries that Kimmy showed, we had earlier in the presentation, like neighborhood organization, school district, and the precincts. When you're in DistrictR under the boundary area to be able to turn those on and off, there's a little eye with a circle around it icon. If you click that, it'll take you to the Metro RLIS website where they host that GIS data. And it might not, there's a lot of technical information about that GIS data, but there are a nice description about that data. So that might be helpful.
Thank you. Kimmy, do you want to resume?
Yeah. So I do want to say that these 3 maps that you're seeing here under the public gallery were submitted by the public and not by us as supposed to have. Just an FYI. I do believe if we hit load drafts down here, you will see flow test 001, which was submitted by us because we were testing the system and making sure that the maps loaded appropriately. So we will not be analyzing that. It is simply our test map. And then again, we have sort of a 4th map in here that was submitted by the public. One of the great things about DistrictR is that it is very easy for people to come in and draw maps or draw communities of interest and identify their community on a map. And it does not require any personal information to be uploaded into their system. They can simply draw the map and save it and it comes up, and that's how we get the analysis. There's a way obviously to name maps. And so if there are community groups or other people that want to come in and draw a map, they can name it, and then we're able to identify it a little bit easier if they come up for public comment and say, we submitted this map and this is what we named it. And then it's just a little bit easier for us to find. So we can go into drawing the 4 district as the map. And here we have the city of Portland. These are all census blocks. So these are streets and all of the data. And so it does get a little bit, we can go in and it's meant to be, and it's intentionally meant to be easy to use. These colors at the top that you sort of can put your paintbrush on and color with them are intended, they are specifically those colors. We can't change those colors, and the reason why is that they were designed for people with color blindness issues and other things on on the internet. And so they're purposely those colors. So if we were to go in and start drawing here, it's very easy to just sort of color in a district and make sure you kind of pick up all these pieces. And it will tell you exactly the total population balance as you're drawing. So it is intentional in that way. It's intended to be, and I'm not drawing a map for any particular reason other than just to show you kind of how this works. If you make a mistake or you don't like how the map looks, you can go in and simply erase it by clicking on the eraser. You can also make your brush a lot larger if you want to draw a little bit faster. And then you go back here, you can zoom in and it will take you down to street level view or to street level names, so that if you know a particular boundary or a particular intersection that you want to include in a district, it's a lot easier to do when you're zooming in and you can see the street names. So when we add on data layers, as I mentioned before, there are the neighborhood organizations, and then there is a way to go in here and see the link, as Alex noted, to the Metro Wireless maps. So if I zoom out a little bit more, you'll be able to see where these approximate neighborhood boundaries are, where the neighborhood boundaries are according to Metro Wireless. So that's and so you are able to go in if you wanted to break it to, draw 4 districts with all neighborhoods kept whole. This is an easy way to be able to see it with this data layer on. Again, you can see the school districts, and then you can also see precinct boundaries. And I had mentioned earlier that we can add an additional layer or two to this map, but if you start turning them all on, it starts to get very difficult to read. And so typically we want to have data layers that we think are going to be most impactful for people when they're drawing maps. Commissioner, I'm sorry, I'm not sure who had their hands up first.
It was Commissioner Valdini first, followed by Commissioner Lorente. Commissioner Valdini.
Hi, thank you. I just had a quick clarifying question about the process. So it's my understanding, and I'm echoing everybody's happiness with district R. I use this for work and it's really fun and easy. And so I recommend everyone just dive in and you'll see it's actually pretty cool. But my regarding our work on this committee, it's my understanding that the districtor folks, they cannot add in a lot of other things that we want to see. So we brought up so many different variables that we want to see around the city. So it's my understanding the process is these maps get submitted by us, by community, by everybody, and then Flow says, okay, if you want this map, then I can tell you all of the various variable outcomes for the districts you created. But there's not going to be a real-time map where we're like, well, what if we move this line over 1 block? What does that get us for socioeconomic variable 7 that we're interested in, right? And is that my understanding? So the process is kind of like we look at a bunch of different maps and Flow says, if you use this map, here are all the variables you're concerned about and their outcomes in this map versus this map. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes and no. So yes, that is the process when we have districtor maps that we're doing analysis on. So we'll look at the maps and give you that report that Alex had showed in his presentation for each of these districtor maps. However, when it comes to drawing draft maps for the commission, and when we kind of get through this districtor piece, we'll talk about this a little bit more. But what is really helpful is for the commissioners to tell us, we would like to see a map with all of the neighborhoods whole, or we would like to see a map where, particular areas are kept whole in this way, or we want to see a map. And so those criteria, having that kind of feedback from both the public and the commissioners is really helpful in designing those first set of draft maps. And then we typically would use those as a starting point, if that makes sense. And it sort of becomes an iterative process. So if there is a map that keeps all of the neighborhood whole, and that is a priority for communities or for individuals on the commission, we can take that map and then start making those changes. So maybe we keep all of the neighborhoods whole, except we think there's a community of interest in a particular area of a neighborhood that might be okay to split. So things like that. And it will be a process of trade-offs at some point, because there's, in my experience, it's, you just can't do everything in one map, kind of, so there will be some trade-offs during that process, but I think it is intended to be a process where we take all of the input and then we're looking at draft maps. And so it is kind of this iterative process. And oftentimes in my experience with commissions, we'll have, a map that everybody, or not everybody, but say most of the commissioners might agree on, and then we'll get a publicly submitted map and they'll say, well, we really like this part of that map. And how do we take this part, that part that we really like, and make those changes? And so that's, that will be Alex's task when we get to that point. So
Thank you.
I think Commissioner Laurenti was next.
Yeah, and then in order, we'll have Commissioner Van Sickle followed by Commissioner Lumley.
Thank you, Kimmy and Alex. You spoke to this at the end of your response there, but just thinking ahead to June 1st, when we release our first map or maps, would it be possible to add those maps as a layer in District R so that community members can kind of use that as a template to sort of like track changes kind of a thing and submit that for consideration? Is that something that's
Yes.
functionally possible?
Yeah, it is. And it's one of, I think one of the great features about Districtor is that they can take those maps and make their own changes and submit them.
Chair Van Sickle Robbins.
Yeah, so with respect to the boundaries, I'm just wondering if we could add, and maybe you're already planning to do this, but we have heard in comment and testimony about the Multnomah County zones for commissioners, and we have heard about the school board zones. And we've also heard about legislative, Senate and House zones, or House districts. So I'm just wondering, since they've already been brought up in comments and stuff, whether we could add those to the boundaries that you can call up.
We can add those to the boundaries. I might suggest that statewide legislative boundaries are often large, and we can add them, but they may or may not encompass the whole city. So that would be my only caveat.
Kimmy, do you mind if I switch to share my screen and I'll just show the other web application? I know it's not ideal to have, two, but we have those two options for y'all because Districtor is not produced by Flow, as Kimmy mentioned, and it is this nice, easy to use application, but it's doesn't lend itself well to adding all those layers, the many that we want to consider. So I just want to quick show this application that is on the commission's website. This is in that district maps page. So right next to Districtor, it's got that additional data. And what we can do here is right now is showing the legend in the top right-hand corner. It's just the city of Portland boundary. If you click on that little layer list, it's going to open up a lot of different options in these drop-down menus. And that little eye icon is telling us that we either want to hide or show the layer of interest. So in this case, I heard that we wanted to put on things like school district boundaries or legislative districts. So we would put that together by maybe looking at Multnomah County commissioner districts. So we want to make sure supplementals turned on. We want to make sure the data source of Multnomah County is turned on. And then we actually want to turn on the commissioner districts. That's going to put them on the map for us. So We can add more to this. Maybe we want to see the hospitals, community centers, fire stations, libraries all stacked on top of each other here. You can do that and get a sense of where these things are. And that's going to help put into context. And once we get more submissions from districtors, kind of the great place to go to, because you can see them all, like Kimmy showed earlier, right in one spot here. You can see the different ones that are being added as we speak. So there are a couple more here. When we get to actually looking at draft maps from the commission, those will be another addition here. So then you will be able to look at draft maps compared to all these other supplemental layers or the census data that's available.
And Alex, there were a couple of questions around specific data, data to overlay in the chat.
Mhm.
So Commissioner Manjara asked about, is it possible to overlay county service maps and also transportation lines as they're part of the criteria?
Yep. So I definitely, there's transportation in there that is supplied by the Metro Regional Land Information System. So it's under that tab, and there are things such as there are arterial streets, all streets. So arterials would be kind of some of the major roads. There are bus lines, max lines, and streetcar lines. So that's all in that grouping. And then if there's a little bit more clarification on what the county service maps are, if they're not in there, then I think that's something we can add to our task list to add.
Commissioner Manjara, do you mind clarifying?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you were actually starting to get at it with the county buildings, like the libraries and parks, different things like that. I think part of it is this area is a little weird because usually the city is providing services and county is doing infrastructure, but here we have county that provides services and city does more infrastructure. So I think that having the county maps and the county data in there versus just jumping up to the metro data is really important. With the metro data, also transportation lines, I did sit on a commission at one point where we were looking at different transportation corridors. So maybe in the presentation of that, because it's one thing to look at just the street, but to understand sort of patterns of how people move in those spaces is really important context. So I don't know when that comes into play, but with just because it's an explicit part of the criteria and thinking about how people move in these districts, if we can get a presentation around that at some point, that would be really helpful.
Thank you, Commissioner. So I see hands from Commissioner Lumley, Chisholm, and Commissioner Van Ness. Commissioner Lumley.
Thank you. I think adding those different layers of data would be very helpful. There's one that I'm really struggling with, and that's communities of common interest. I'm not quite sure how to define them, but just by way of example, I live really close to I-205, and I hear people often say a boundary of, say, east of 84, when in actuality 205 is really the primary boundary. And the reason I say that is because if we use 84 as a boundary, we might divide the J district in half. And I'm not quite sure how big the J district is, or specifically where the community defines it, or where they want to see it even grow. So how do we get at that kind of information, communities of common interest? Do we wait for public comment, or should we be trying to put maps out there now that show that? Or what is the process for getting to that information? The other data layers I think are readily available. This one I'm struggling with. Maybe it's my job to go out there and ask those questions and bring it back to the committee, or solicit specific public input on that. I'm not quite sure. Just maybe people who've done this before can help me and all of us wrap our arms around how we can do the best job we can at keeping communities of common interest together.
Did you want to jump in?
So I think that it sounded to me as though the communications plan that was laid out earlier in today's meeting probably gets to a lot of that community of common interest feedback that you're looking for. I think that it's all of those opportunities and the methods of reaching out to them are very important. And I think that that's covered very well in that earlier presentation. And I think you will get a lot of that feedback. I also think that if you know of those things, then, certainly bringing them up during this process is important as well.
Yeah, and we've discussed this too in our very first meeting together, as we were all getting to know one another and the public was getting to know you. We walked through the criteria of how everyone on the commission was selected, and your ties to community and understanding of different communities, those intersections, is a reason why you're here. So that between your professional, your lived, all the experience that you just bring to the table as a group, I think really is one of those strengths that you can rely on. And then I think in the same meeting, February 15th, part of the presentation from the technical consultant, one of the takeaways was you're going to continue to learn about and define communities of interest with every single week and day, right? As the discussion and the discourse is going to, of course, happen within this group, but it's going to be much broader than that too, as others are going to be responding. So there are going to be a multitude of mechanisms. You're right, Kimmy, the community engagement work plan, the development of that, much of it is oriented around how do we have this discussion intentionally as we go and among community. But then also, how can you as individuals also, just based on your knowledge, but also based on your connections and your community, how can you bring that information back to the table for consideration? So, not a perfect process. It's also it's not linear by any means, right? But ideally, you'd like to find a strategy that allows you to lean into those complexities, right, and have them enrich the process.
So is that work done by us individually then, or is that done by the community engagement work group? The reason I ask is because I just don't know if I should be going out now to the community and asking, showing the maps and saying, hey, can you draw circles on the map and show me where you want to see, or that's something the community engagement group is doing.
I don't want to speak for the community engagement work group, but I do know that this was a topic that came up as the Commissioner Hanson came off his raising her hand too, right? This idea is that everyone on the process is really a team effort, right? In the sense that all of you are not going to be making decisions as individuals, right? But this idea of being vehicles to inform the process and having not just 13, right? There are alternates, there are people, there are so many resources just here in this group that can help inform that process. So even if you're not the ones actively drawing the circles and you're not making the decisions for the group, being able to convene those discussions with people who trust you and recognize you as a kind of a key individual in this process can help make it fuller. So, and I think that's where I would throw the challenge to the full group, not just the work group, but the entire body to really think intentionally about how you want to do this engagement. And a lot of that is up to you as a group.
Thank you.
I'm going to break a rule a little bit because I did see Commissioner Hanson kind of respond, and we are on this topic. Commissioner, did you have any points to add on the community engagement work group?
Yeah,
And
just echoing what, responding to Commissioner Lumley and echoing what Sophia said in the chat about collectively, like, yes, the idea is we would love for everyone on this commission to do that type of outreach and ask those questions. And one of the things I'm thinking about is, there might be some folks who feel really excited about going down the rabbit hole of playing in Districtr and, mapping it out and seeing what that looks like. And there might be other people for whom that's either technologically not accessible or just feels overwhelming or just like totally outside of their scope. And so perhaps in those conversations and in that context, those 4 guiding questions that I presented from the community working group might be another way for folks to, similarly give feedback from their lived experience that can then inform what the maps actually look like without them having to draw on the maps themselves. So it's definitely something I hope that the work group can continue to chat with the staff about, how we actually operationalize this. And like, since this tool is on the website, how do we also get those questions up on the website and get them translated into different languages and kind of start to gather that information. But thank you.
Thank you. We'll jump to the regular order. Commissioner Chisholm, followed by Commissioner Van Ness, Baldini, and then Manadas.
I raised my hand to say one thing, but now I'm going to also respond to Commissioner Lumley. You know, if this was a purely data-driven process, a purely technocratic process, we wouldn't need all of us. And we're all here to provide our lived experiences and lived experiences of the communities that we are connected to. You know, the city will give you a boundary for the J district. That doesn't necessarily mean where the community that believes in the J district, that feels part of the J district, necessarily lives. And so you can stare at a map and see what the Asian American population is by census block, and you can also talk to people and understand that maybe that community isn't just where they live, but it's also where they shop or where they eat. So we should all, I think, be reaching out and bring this values-based and experience-based effort to bear on all this, which also then leads me to my comment I was going to make in response to what Commissioner Van Sickle Robbins had to say about bringing in those other maps. Of course, it's perfectly reasonable to look at county commission district maps, legislative district maps, congressional district maps, the Metro Council district maps. But I also would say that every one of those maps was developed by a districting process like the one we're going through here. And we don't necessarily know what values they brought to that process. In some ways, if we were making our maps purely derivative of those maps, we'd be essentially outsourcing our values to theirs, and perhaps to ones that we don't even know what they are. And so, for example, in the legislative district map, it's a statewide map. The partisan balance is the big fight. How many seats do the Democrats get, Republicans get? In the city of Portland, they're all Democrats, but it might be influenced by the fact they're trying to steer a partisan outcome in some other part of the state entirely. And we don't necessarily want to outsource our values to that process. So I would encourage us to look as little at those maps as possible, and instead look at the communities of interest that we all know and care about in the city of Portland, and things like service delivery, underrepresented communities within Portland, school districts, which I think are very important to people's sense of community, as well as the sort of hard things like roads and streetcars and max lines and rivers and parks and so forth. So that's my comment. Bring your values to this process, and I would really encourage everyone to spend an enormous amount of time going down the rabbit hole if you're able. If you're not, I'll come over to your house. We'll play with the maps together. You will learn an enormous amount about the city by starting to draw maps yourself, because you start with a premise of like, I want this to be true. And then you do it and you're like, it's too big, it's too small. I got to push something over here. If I do that, that goes wrong. And that process, first of all, is tremendously fun. And secondly, will teach you an enormous amount about the city.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Van Ness and Baldini, and Commissioner Judd, you'll follow after Commissioner Manhattan.
Thank you. Well, I just feel like this is such a kismet. It's such a good opportunity to explain, or this is so aligned with what we're talking about, because what wasn't mentioned is that the reason that this meeting was moved was because it was originally scheduled for the first night of Passover. I'm assuming everyone knows what Passover is, but I realize that the Jewish community is not a very large community in Portland, but Passover is a very significant holiday, as significant as Christmas. And I don't want to throw anyone under the bus, but it's something the city should have known better about. They should have not scheduled something on the first night of Passover. And it took a little bit of pushback to get this meeting moved. And then I have to say today, the sentiment that I took away in the beginning of this meeting was, thank you everyone so much for being so accommodating in changing the schedule, instead of the city saying, wow, we just made a mistake here. The Jewish community is part of the community and we screwed up. That would have been the better approach. So I just think that's a really good illustration of everything we're talking about, right? We want to serve all of these underserved communities, and I'm happy to, if we want to schedule a night where I can educate the commission or the public about historically the anti-Semitism that like every other minority community, there is a tragic past and bad history that happened to my people. So that's a really good example of why we do need to be really thoughtful about communities who may not represent a large percentage of the city, but still matter. That was the first thing I said, and I wrote down because I did not want to forget, because I still feel like, why don't we have some of the commissioners talk about where they're starting? Like, why don't we start talking about, if any of us have ideas of how these 4 districts should be, can we start talking about that? I mean, we're all educated people. We all are assertive people. We will ask the questions if we need to figure out how this actual app works. And I assure you, I will need help with that because I'm old and I'm not good at technology. But I thought I was here to meet with a bunch of fellow Portlanders to figure out these 4 districts. So is it possible that we can start having that conversation at some point? That would be so great. And that's all.
Thank you, Commissioner. And Commissioner Baldini, followed by Commissioner Manjarrez and Commissioner Judd.
Great, thank you. I just had a quick question about the maps. One thing that I've been discovering as I play with the Districtor tool is that and I think this is probably true for all of us, and indeed everyone who submits a map, there are certain areas of the city that I am really confident about, that I'm like, I know exactly where this line should go. And using all the layers too. There are other areas of the city that I have no idea about, right? It would be great if when we got a map, the person who sent in the map said, I really know this area. And so this line here is really thoughtful. But you'll see when you're making the map, sometimes you're just like, well, I guess I have to put a whole bunch of people over here. I don't really know, but I do know that this part of outer east, this is a great place to put the line. But over here in the west, I don't know, maybe this is a good place. So what I'm saying is it would be great if we had some kind of opportunity to ask the people who are submitting maps, why did you put the lines there? Was it because this area of the city you know well? This one you just kind of smoosh together? I'm not sure. And if my fellow commissioners don't think that would be valuable, forget it. But it would be that when I'm thinking about community engagement, it would be so helpful for when we're reviewing all the maps, and I suspect we're going to have a lot of maps to review. We had some sort of statement or some kind of, this is why I did this, because I'm familiar with this community and I wanted to make sure it stayed together. Does that resonate? Does that make sense?
Yes.
Seeing heads nod. And Alex, sorry, I just saw you come off mute. Are you trying to jump in?
Sure, I will just real quick. I think, if and when we get to it here, Timmy might have had a little bit more to go through on Districtor with a district plan, but we could also show the community of common interest part of Districtor, because it's kind of aligned with what was just said, is maybe you don't want to draw a whole district plan in the 4 districts, but rather you want to just submit your neighborhood. Or maybe you do have a good idea of what one district could be. So you could submit that as a community of interest and say, I really feel strongly that this is a good boundary for one of the districts. And you can write a name, if not also notes, I believe. Yeah, you can describe your community. So that'd be a good place to do that.
Thank you. And just flagging, just in the interest of time, so we'll have about 12 minutes until we need to adjourn this meeting, but we should probably start to wrap up the discussion portion. And also, Kimmy, I do apologize. I thought you were at the end, but I realized we may have cut the walkthrough short a bit. So let's take a few more comments, and I do want to reserve a little bit of time just to make sure if there are any specific additional data requests that you'd like to share with the Flow Analytics team that we are able to make those requests this evening. And you can also contact staff via email as well if you're thinking about this in the coming days and would like to make a request that way. So Commissioner Manjarrez and Judd and Commissioner Wise, I think I saw you put your hand down, but if you need to jump in, just put that back up. Commissioner Manjarrez.
Yeah, thank you. Great. I will be very quick because I apologize that we did cut off the presentation with our comments, but did want to raise the accessibility issue that Commissioner Hanson and Commissioner Lumley actually just reminded me of as we're going through this. I think it can be really exciting to get into the tool, and some of us are more familiar or spend more time online than others, but do want to name just sort of like very explicitly that this tool could be it seems fun, and it is fun, but it's also could be very intimidating for individuals. And there are a lot of folks who aren't going to dive in here and start to build maps. And so there is, and I'm just going to make a suggestion for the community engagement group that I've seen great examples of community participatory sort of mapping, where if at our events, especially if we're going to be meeting in different parts of the city, we can have something up of the city where people can actually just draw something about their community of interest. One, I think it could be a really fun interactive tool, but also really a good data gathering tool because people do process differently. So I think layering in the questions is really important for the verbal processors. I think having something where people can just draw as they come in. That way, if they don't get to public comment, maybe they, make their point on the wall. It could be something that we look at and overlay just to make sure we have our bases covered. And it's a good engagement incentive for community organizations to bring folks to these meetings so they can engage with something like that. So happy to share more information about that and know folks in Portland who do that kind of facilitation, but I think it's as simple as putting a geographic map up. So just wanted to offer that and sort of balance how much we consider maps that are being submitted by folks who have a lot of time, have a lot of interest in going through this data and building these, and then other folks who may not have that privilege. So just wanted to elevate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. And Commissioner Judd?
Yeah, I just want to go back to Commissioner Lumley's point in terms of this is one of the things that the community engagement group was kind of dealing with, which is whether it's defining community of interest around socioeconomic issues, whether it's around other issues, how far out does that radiate? And I'm hoping that maybe Kimmy, if you and Alex could help me out with this, because I'm wondering, as we look at the value chain and as we think about mapping in the context of defining these themes within communities, which one has the greatest value given the context that we're in? So for example, if maybe my visual thinking about this is incorrect, but because there are 4 districts that that already kind of defined for us, that's different than having 5 because it's very symmetrical, right? And then if you think about how you can organize 4 different spaces within a space, and given all the requirements that we have in terms of being contiguous, not dividing, census blocks and so forth, that sounds like that's a tremendous help for us. And so the efforts of sort of, figuring out how those 12,300 and some odd census blocks fits into 4 different regions, really what we're talking about are the edges where they touch, because the outside boundaries is not going to change. So we're really talking about the interior boundaries in which that intersection takes place and where we're going to divide them. And so if that's the case, then it seems to me that that's a very, and this is what I'm hoping you can challenge me in this, because I'm getting biased towards defining what those themes are within communities and finding out where the centers of the communities are of these different regions and how far out they radiate, such that, for example, we're talking about far east. Well, if you have 4 points, or you have an even 4 points and you line them up, it goes either straight across or you stack them. And so far east would be either split into 2 or remain as 1. And so, to just kind of be symmetrical. The whole point being Commissioner Chisholm was talking about spending time to going through the mapping. It seems like you're going to get to an infinite solution, or you're going to get to 4 basic solutions because you're talking about the interior and how they touch. And so is the emphasis then to working on that community engagement piece and understanding how those themes radiate? I'm just hoping that, like, maybe Kimby, if you and Alice can talk about where we should err on the side of, whether it's the literally playing the tool and coming up with spatial designs, or whether it's defining those community interests.
So I'll weigh in and then I'll let Alex weigh in as well. In my experience, defining those communities of interest is sort of that first step. And then, and you'll hear more information about those communities as the process goes. And so if I had to pick between, is having a perfect map the priority, or is listening to the communities of interest, like which comes first, I would say listen to the communities of interest, and then consider the mapping piece. So Alex, I don't know if you want to weigh in on that.
The only thing I'll add is you all and the city itself is in a different situation than redistricting, right? Like usually we would have a starting place and we would say, hey, we're a little out of balance. Over the last 10 years from 2010 to 2020, these 2 districts grew a lot, these 2 didn't. So we need to make some changes on their edges. We don't have that here. So it might sound a little daunting because we're starting from a blank map. But as we just saw from the districtor page, we already have some submissions. And because we all know a little bit about Portland, there's going to be some maps that we could draw pretty easily just to say, does this look like it works? We talked, in earlier meetings about maybe there's a district that's going to be on the west side of the Willamette. But we know that maybe it's going to need a little bit of population on the east side. So we could start with that. And then we've heard a lot about a district that is serving the far east side, and we could go there, and then you even work a little bit more in the middle. So I think there's going to be some good starting points from these public submissions, and then it really is, like Kimmy said, getting the feedback from the community and the knowledge you all have about your that you bring to the table from your lived experience and from your communities.
Thank you. So Commissioner Hanson, you'll have our final comment for the evening. To the Flow Analytics team, just want you to be thinking, are there any other questions that you might have for the commission as we wrap up? Because you'll be moving into drawing those initial draft maps. Is there any kind of lingering question that you may have? So first, let's go to Commissioner Hanson. We'll wrap up with any outstanding items potentially from Flow, and then I'll turn to you, Commissioner Sexton, to close this out. Commissioner Hanson?
Yeah, I'll keep this super brief. A couple of super quick points. Number one, just to address what Commissioner Van Ness brought up. Commissioner Van Ness, I'm not sure if you're there, but I'm going to reach out because I would love to have a offline conversation to unpack some of what you just shared. It did not land particularly well with me, and I think it's important for us to be not kind of playing oppression Olympics in this space. So would love to have an offline conversation about that. Would love to express my gratitude to the staff for the many, many hours they put into rescheduling for tonight's meeting. And then to shift back to the topic at hand, which I've loved this conversation, kind of a next step question of what is our timeline for these. I wanted to uplift Commissioner Van Sickle Robbins' comment in the chat around, and with the community engagement process, like I'm wondering if what is our timeline for wanting kind of responses in these phase 1 information gathering on the community engagement side? What is our timeline for wanting to get these sample maps from the community so that we can make decisions? Is it mid-May, end of May, so that we can make decisions early May? Anyway, timeline and next steps would be helpful because I think we can then work backwards from there. Thank you all.
I think so. The staff is working on the community engagement work plan, but that also will tie into the broader work plan as well. So I think I'm seeing Sophia nod, get more specific, especially kind of knowing where we're going next, starting with draft maps. So Sophia, I saw you taking notes. Okay, Commissioner Chisholm, can you be really
Yeah,
quick?
so the last item on our agenda tonight was that we were supposed to provide Flow Analytics with direction on what we would like to see on the draft maps. We actually haven't done that yet. And if they're going to be coming back to us with draft maps, they haven't actually heard from us about what we think should be in those draft maps. I don't want to extend this any further. We're at 9 o'clock. So is there a way that we should be providing that feedback offline?
So I actually think there was a lot of discussion around what could be included in at least draft maps from layering data. But in terms of direction, saying I definitely want, we would like to see as a body maps with this. Kimmy, do you feel like you have enough, Kimmy and Alex, do you feel like you have enough information, or would you like to continue with feedback offline?
I think I'll defer to Alex on whether or not he thinks he has enough information on this.
Well, I think it is obvious to everyone that we didn't get to look at the map specifically and say, we want to have District 1, you know, and encompass this area of Portland. But we do have on the Districtor page now 5 submissions, and there are some common themes here. And I guess I real quickly, in the interest of time, I will share my screen one more time just to show those. And I know these are the small kind of icons here, but we can see that there's already kind of some coalescing around the idea of probably what was heard in earlier meetings about potentially having a district on the west side of the Willamette, potentially expanding into the east side a little bit. Where that happens, that's, you know, something we'll be working on in the future. But then in all of these, we kind of see a district on the east side with a boundary that's kind of undefined. It could include Rocky Butte, and it could use 82nd as a boundary, or perhaps it does not. So you can kind of see and hear some of the rough boundaries that are being shown, and then one that's more northeast, North Portland, and then more of a core southeast. So I think right here we have a pretty good idea from 5 maps that there's kind of one draft map that you guys could start with. I guess that's my comment.
Where did they come from, these maps? Just curious. Were they posted by the public or? Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Can we play around with the maps and just save them, or does everything we do get posted to the public? Like if I was to create a map and just play around, is that something going to be out for public comment?
I just was over playing with it and created a map over there that I didn't submit, and I will tell you the edges are very complicated. Like you can create 4 equal-ish districts of around 160,000, but where to put the edges is what we'll be talking about.
I will add, I'm sorry, just one thing that was the very last slide of the presentation that we didn't quite get through. But with Districtor, one of the quirks of Districtor is that because it was intended for public comment and to be part of a public record for some cities and counties that used it, there is not a way to delete a map off of it once it's been posted. So just, you know, not to scare anyone into not drawing a map and submitting it, but just so that you understand, we've had some interestingly drawn maps in other cities and we're not able to take them down. So that's,
you can create a map and then not post it, right?
You can.
Yeah.
You can play.
Can you create a map and save it without posting it, or do you have to post it?
I believe you can save it without posting it, but I'm not 100. I need to
But
go.
I believe that might show up as the works in progress.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. So
is this going to come up at the next meeting then? Are we going to? Sorry, I didn't see there was a hand up. I apologize.
So here's what we'll do. Commissioner Manjarres, we can keep it like 15 seconds.
100%. It would be helpful. I don't know who posted those maps, and I don't feel comfortable going off of maps when you don't know who posted this or the process. If we could have the folks from Flow Analytics maybe next time bring us 4 different versions that are looking at different population options so that we can sort of get a sense of where we could tweak, that would be really helpful. Or we could have sort of an interim feedback process, but I think even just having different options and iterations based on population density would be really helpful starting point for me. But would not support starting from random maps that have been posted. Like don't really know where those came from. But I support folks engaging in the process, so people should keep posting maps.
And then I was going to propose, if it works for the Flow Analytics team from a process perspective, you have the required criteria in the ballot measure. You have the decision there on not adding additional criteria. You have some starting points for some maps, and I think we just heard a proposal for 4, if that's feasible. Just some sample maps to get the commission to be able to start visualizing based on the criteria that they're starting from. Does that work from a process perspective?
Oh, absolutely.
Perfect.
Is there a way
So-
that commissioners can submit maps
On Districtor?
in any way so that you know that they're from commissioners and not from the general public? Given that this is supposed to be a commissioner-driven process.
Yeah, you can absolutely submit a map on Districtor. You could simply name it, at IDC or with your name.
Put your name on it?
You could also send them to Sophia, and then she will kind of collate them and send them to us as well.
So are we now allowed to discuss with each other, like talk about the map stuff? Because we were told a few weeks ago that we couldn't communicate via email among the commission. So can we talk about our different map ideas via our public email addresses?
So Sophia, can you briefly walk us through the protocol for deliberation versus
Yeah, absolutely.
instruction to staff?
Yeah, so you all are public officials, so you can't have meetings or dialogue offline that is not accessible to the public. So that's what comes via email. So you can't go back and forth and email the whole commission about your thoughts or intentions. You all can talk individually about your ideas. It's just about quorum. So it's like when you include all of the public officials. And we'll have our city attorney come and join us at one of our meetings to do a quick little training and remind folks about that. But to Commissioner Chisholm's point, if you do want to draw a map on District R and submit it, just maybe submit it and then let me know via email so that I can, on the back end, kind of like talk with the Flow Analytics folks and let them know.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Commissioner Saxena, do apologize that we're a little bit over, but I'll pass it to you to wrap us up for the evening.
Sure, yeah. Thanks, everyone. And I would encourage folks to go play with Districtor. It's fun, and you'll see how complicated it is to come up with boundaries. So our next meeting is next Wednesday, April 19th from 6 to 9. It will be a hybrid meeting via Zoom and in person in the Portland building in room 100. And with that, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone. And thanks, Autumn. I will miss you, and welcome, Amber. Appreciate all of you.
I already miss you all. Thank you so much. Thank you for the kind words, and thank you again for the intentionality and just thoughtfulness through this process. And thank you, Chair Saxena, for closing us out. And like you said, we're adjourned. Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.